Take a deep breath now, slowly and fully. Feel it fill your chest, your ribs, your quiet heart. Find the way you wish to listen, resting, reclining, or sitting in still awareness. Let comfort find you. We spend much of life moving from one thing to the next, thought to thought, task to task. But Zen reminds us that peace hides not in the doing, but in the pause between all things. These stories live in that pause. They are not meant to be solved or remembered, but to be felt. If you wish, share where you're listening from, or what you hope to rediscover tonight. Maybe patience, maybe calm, maybe a truth you once knew, but forgot. The pause has already begun, and now we begin the story together. Long ago, in the shadow of the Mahabharata range, there lived a young man named Jorin. He was clever, quick-witted, strong of voice and proud of heart. But Jorin carried something deeper, an anger that lived just beneath his skin, not always cruel, but sharp, like a wind that turned cold without warning. One day, after an argument with his father, Jorin stormed out of their stone cottage and began climbing the mountain trail above their village. "I don't need anyone," he shouted at the trees. But the forest only rustled in reply. He climbed higher until the air turned thin and the path narrowed to rock and dust. At the highest ridge, he stopped and yelled into the vastness below. "I hate you!" The words bounced off stone, and to his surprise, the mountain answered, "I hate you! I hate you!" The echo rang out across the cliffs, his own voice thrown back at him. Jorin blinked. He had never heard the mountain speak before. Curious, he cupped his hands again. "You're a fool!" The echo answered, "You're a fool, a fool." Now he laughed nervously. Then, hesitantly, he tried, "I love you." And again the valley responded, "I love you. Love you." His voice returned, but changed by the silence it passed through. Jorin stood there for a long time, the cold wind tugging at his sleeves, the vastness of the world pressing in. And then he turned back down the path, but quieter than before. This is the story of karma, of how what we send out returns. Commentary. In Sanskrit, karma means action, but not just physical action. Also thought, speech, intention. Each one plants a seed. And those seeds, over time, bear fruit, not as punishment, not as reward, but as response. Like an echo. The mountain did not decide to insult Jorin. It simply returned what was given. This is the truth of karma. The world is not judging you. It is reflecting you. The Buddha once said, "With our thoughts, we make the world." Speak or act with a pure mind, and happiness follows you, like a shadow that never leaves. Most people think karma is about fate, but it's not. Karma is not what happens to you. It's how you move, and what that movement shapes in return. Jorin didn't change overnight, but that moment on the mountain stayed with him. He began to notice the way his words shaped the people around him, how a harsh joke left someone smaller, how a small kindness lifted a room. He didn't always get it right, but now he listened for the echo. One day, years later, Jorin stood at the base of the same mountain. His son, angry about a broken toy, was shouting at the sky. Jorin placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "Careful, little one. The mountain hears." The boy looked up, puzzled, and Jorin smiled. "Speak gently, even when no one answers right away. Because life is an echo. Sometimes it comes back loud, sometimes soft, sometimes years later, sometimes not until your children feel it. But it always returns. So what will you shout into the valley? What kind of world will your words shape? Be mindful of your echoes, because one day you'll hear them again. Once there was a king who ruled over a vast and golden land. His palace was made of marble and sandalwood. His robes shimmered with threads of moonlight. His name echoed through the valleys like a song carried on wind. But one day, in the middle of a grand festival, the king grew suddenly tired. He stepped away from the court, laid down in the shade of a fig tree, and closed his eyes, just for a moment. And in that moment, he dreamed. In the dream, he was no longer a king. He was a farmer. His hands were calloused. His home was a straw hut. He tilled the soil each morning, worked through sweat and storm, and fell asleep beside a dying lantern. Years passed in this dream. He married, had children, lost crops, buried a son. He aged, sickened, and finally lay dying in his dream bed of straw, holding his daughter's hand. As he drew his last breath, he awoke, back under the fig tree, back in silk, back in the sound of distant music from the palace. No time had passed, only the blink of an eye. He sat up and wept. This is the story of samsara, the cycle of birth, death, and illusion. Commentary. The Buddha once said, "This world is a dream, a bubble, a shadow. See it as such." But it does not mean the world is meaningless. It means that clinging to the dream, believing it is the whole of reality, is what causes suffering. The king's dream felt real. He loved, he cried, he endured, and yet it was only a flicker in his mind. When he awoke, he was still himself, still whole, still the same awareness, only now clearer. So too with rebirth. You are born into a form, live a life, gather names, habits, memories, and when that form ends, the awareness that knew it does not die. It simply moves, like a dreamer waking into another dream. Samsara is not a punishment. It is a lesson, a series of dreams to awaken from. Not by denying them, but by seeing through them. When the king returned to court, he no longer ruled with pride. He ruled with humility, with tenderness, as one who knew that even a crown is made of the same dust as a farmer's hoe. He often sat under that same fig tree in silence. When people asked why, he would only say, "That is where I remembered." One day, he invited monks to his court. Among them was a sage known for his stillness. The king asked him, "How do I know which world is the dream and which is true?" The monk replied with a smile, "Ask the one who is watching them both." Who is that? The witness, the awareness, the one who saw the king dreaming of the farmer, the one who sees you dreaming this life. It is not your name, not your face, not even your memories. It is that which knows, always watching, always here, even as the dream changes. This is the mind beyond mind, the unshaken center, the part of you that does not sleep, even when the body rests. The Buddha's teachings do not try to wake you with alarm bells. They whisper. They let you walk the path until one day, under a tree or beside a river or in a quiet moment between breaths, you see it for yourself. This is a dream. And yet, I am real. The king died many years later, not in fear, but as one who knew how dreams begin and end. He left behind a poem carved into the fig tree. When I was awake, I thought I ruled. When I slept, I thought I served. Now I know I am neither. I am the dreamer and the waking. So when the world feels heavy or the illusion too thick, sit quietly. Breathe and ask yourself, what part of me is watching this? Not to escape the dream, but to wake kindly inside it. The novice stepped forward, eyes low, robes gathered neatly in his arms. He had heard whispers of the great master Joshu, of his clarity, of his presence, of the way his words, brief, sharp, could undo years of illusion in a single moment. And so, the novice came with a question, simple, ancient, and burning. He bowed deeply. Does a dog have Buddha nature? Joshu looked at him, quiet as a still pond, then said, Mu. Just that. One word, Mu. The novice blinked. He had expected a teaching, a parable, perhaps even a sermon on interdependence or karma. But all he got was this one syllable, Mu. Number not no, as in rejection, but Mu, as in as in empty, as in beyond yes or no. The novice opened his mouth to speak again, to clarify, to plead for context, but Joshu had already returned to trimming the bonsai. And the novice was left standing there, holding a question that would not let go. Does a dog have Buddha nature? In the Mahayana tradition, the answer is yes. All beings have Buddha nature, even the smallest ant, even the vilest criminal, even the barking dog on the dusty street. The Heart Sutra says, form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. So why did Joshu say Mu? It wasn't to contradict the sutras, it was to shock the mind out of seeking answers like stones in a riverbed. For weeks, the novice could not sleep. He replayed the moment again and again. He wrote MU in his journal. He whispered it during walking meditation. He shouted it into the wind. He carried it like a thorn in the foot, every step made sharper by its presence. One night, a senior monk approached him in the meditation hall. "Why do you look so troubled?" he asked. The novice bowed his head. "Master Joshu gave me a koan. Does a dog have Buddha nature?" He said, "Mu! I don't understand." The monk smiled gently. "You won't." "Not yet." The novice frowned. "Then what should I do?" "Burn your logic," said the monk, "and sit." In the centuries that followed, Joshu's Mu became the first koan in the Gateless Gate, a collection of paradoxical encounters meant to tear open the mind. And it is said that some monks meditated on Mu for 5 years, 10, even 20. Not because the question was hard, but because the answer required the death of the one asking it. Mu is not a word, it is a doorway, but it has no latch, no hinges, no frame. Only a gate that exists because the mind insists there must be one. And the moment you stop trying to walk through it, it disappears. The novice became obsessed. He stopped eating. He stopped speaking. He carried Mu through every moment like a fever dream. He touched it while pouring tea. He chewed it like rice. He sat with it in the dark until the wind outside sounded like it was chanting back to him. Mu, mu, mu. He began to tremble. And still, no clarity, no breakthrough, only silence. One dawn, after 300 days of silent retreat, he broke. He stood in the rain, lifted his head to the grey sky, and shouted, "What is Mu?" The sound echoed against the temple walls. A bird fluttered. A branch creaked, but nothing answered. He fell to his knees, not in defeat, in surrender, not to ignorance, but to not knowing. And in that moment, he let go, not just of the question, but of the one who needed the answer. And that's when it happened. Not a flash, not a thunderclap, just a quiet shift, a falling away, and everything returned. The wind, the breath, the feeling of water on his skin, the sound of a dog barking in the distance. Nothing extraordinary, and yet everything was different. He stood, he laughed, he bowed. Later, when the novice returned to Yoshu, the master asked no questions. He looked once in the monk's eyes and simply said, "Good." Nothing more, because no explanation was needed. You cannot explain Mu, you can only become it. Commentary. In Western terms, we often ask, is it this or that? Zen asks, who is asking? Yoshu's Mu is not a negation of the dog's Buddha nature. It is a negation of the very framework of the question. To ask, does a dog have Buddha nature, is to separate Buddha nature from dog, to assume that it's something a being might possess. But Buddha nature is not a possession. It is not a label. It is the breath before thought, the space before division. Mu is the erasure of the chalkboard before the question is even written. Zen does not want you to answer the question. It wants the question to consume you, until there's nothing left, until only presence remains, until even Mu is forgotten. And the wind in the pines is enough. The gateless gate is open to all. But to pass through, you must stop trying to pass. You must stop searching for the latch. There is no Mu outside yourself. It is not in the words of sutras, not in the mind's debate. It is here, now, when all seeking stops and the moment is allowed to be just as it is. Even a barking dog, even your own confusion, even the silence after reading this sentence. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us turn to a tale about recognition and the true nature of worth. This is the next story. The road to Kusinara was quiet, not silent, never that, but filled with the hush of a world preparing to let go. Leaves rustled without wind. Birds called, but softly, like they too were watching. The monks walked in silence, their robes brushing against dry earth. And at the front, supported by Ananda's steady hand, walked the Buddha. His body was frail. The form that had once walked hundreds of miles barefoot, that had sat unshaken through storms, through temptation, through hunger, now trembled with every step. His ribs showed like lines drawn in dust. His shoulders drooped like branches in drought. But his eyes were clear, bright, as steady as the day he left the palace gates. They reached a grove of sal trees on the outskirts of the small village of Kusinara. The Buddha paused. "Here," he said softly. "Let us rest here. This is a good place." The sal trees stood in silent formation, tall, pale, and blooming out of season, their white blossoms drifting like snow. Some monks whispered that the trees had awakened too, that nature itself knew what was coming. Ananda laid down a folded robe beneath his teacher's head. The others formed a soft ring around them, as if holding the space open, sacred and still. The Buddha reclined on his right side, in the lion's posture, facing west. His breathing was shallow but steady. The light of the setting sun turned the dust gold. "It is time," he said. "The body is like a worn cart, held together by straps and will. It has served its purpose. Let it be." Ananda knelt beside him, eyes already full of tears. "You always said not to cling," he whispered. "But I don't know how not to." The Buddha turned his gaze to his beloved attendant. "You have served with a heart free of self, Ananda, for 25 years, never once wavering. You have been my shadow in daylight, my shelter in storm. You are not losing me. You are gaining the path." Ananda bowed, his forehead to the earth. "But the world will feel so empty without your footsteps." The Buddha smiled gently. "Then fill it with your own." Words spread through Kusinara like a breeze stirring dry leaves. The Blessed One is near death. Men and women came with offerings, not of gold, but of rice, of garlands, of silence. Some stood at a distance, unable to speak. Others stepped forward and bowed low, their heads pressed to the soil. A blacksmith named Kunda came, humbly bearing a meal. A dish of mushrooms and tender greens, prepared with utmost care. The Buddha accepted it with gratitude and blessed the man. Later, as pain overtook him, he turned to Ananda. "Tell Kunda this," he said. "He should feel no regret. 2 meals in my life stand out. The first, offered by Sujata, gave strength for awakening. This one gives strength for release. Both are sacred. Both are complete." Ananda nodded, committing the words to memory. The sun dipped low. The monks gathered beneath the sal trees, their hearts heavy. Some sat in deep meditation. Others simply watched their teacher, afraid to blink. The blossoms continued to fall gently, like the breath of the world slowing down. The Buddha opened his eyes. "Perhaps some of you think the teacher is gone. We have no one to guide us now, but that is not so." His voice was calm, though each word required effort. "You must be your own lamps. Be a refuge unto yourselves. Take the Dharma as your island. Do not look outside for shelter." A long silence followed. Then he added, with clarity that cut through every grief, "All compounded things are subject to decay. Strive with diligence." He closed his eyes and entered deep absorption, one state after another, like ripples fading across a pond. First through the 4 jhanas, then through the formless states, boundless space, boundless consciousness, neither perception nor non-perception, and then beyond. His breath slowed, then faded, then stopped. But the silence that followed was not empty, it was whole. The sal blossoms fell across his body. One landed gently on his brow. Ananda did not cry at first. No one did. The stillness was too vast. It reached into them. It opened a space that no sorrow could fill. A hush settled over the grove, deeper than sleep, deeper than night. Even the birds fell quiet. Even the wind held back. And then, as if cued by the moment, the sal trees swayed. Not with breeze, but with knowing, with reverence. The Blessed One had passed into parinirvana. They sat for hours, no words, no movement, just presence. Some monks touched their foreheads to the ground. Others sat upright, spine like a mountain, anchoring the grief in stillness. When finally the moon rose, round and full, like a soft eye watching from above, Ananda stood. "He is gone," he said softly, voice breaking. "No," whispered another monk, a younger one. "He is everywhere now." The cremation took place days later. They built a pyre of fragrant sandalwood, wrapped his body in layers of clean cloth and placed it with care. 8 royal families sent emissaries to claim relics, and a solemn agreement was reached. The remains would be divided equally, enshrined in stupas across the land. But the true relic was not ash. It was the teaching, the 4 noble truths, the eightfold path, the silence behind the breath, the calm behind the storm, the truth that lives on not in memory, but in practice. In time, monks and nuns would walk for weeks to reach that sal grove. Some would come in silence, others would chant, but all would feel something shift as they stepped beneath the trees. They would sit on the earth where the Buddha last rested and listen, not for sound, but for understanding. And sometimes, if the wind was just right, they would hear it, strive with diligence. Ananda, as the years passed, returned often. He would sit beneath the very tree where he had knelt that night. He would run his hand along its bark, worn smooth now by the prayers of many. He would remember the final gaze, the final breath, and the words that lingered after everything else had passed away. All things that arise must pass, but the path is timeless. And in the stillness there would be no fear, only peace. And so that is how he left, not in triumph, not in spectacle, but in peace, wrapped in stillness, under trees that bloomed out of season, as if even nature bowed to the one who no longer clung. And in that final moment, the world did not end. It simply continued, quieter, wiser, and forever changed. Before time was measured by stars, before mountains were named, before the sutras had been spoken, there was a vow. A single vow, whispered not to the heavens, but to the suffering of the world. I will not enter nirvana until all beings are free. This was the vow of Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of compassion, not a god, not a savior, but a being who heard the cries of the world and stayed. In Sanskrit, his name means the one who hears the sounds of the world. In China, he is Guanyin, the one who listens. In Tibet, Chenrezig, the gentle-eyed protector. In Japan, Kannon, the goddess with a gaze like soft rain. He takes many forms, male, female, neither, all. Because compassion is not bound by gender. It is a response, a presence, a hand that reaches out before the mind decides whether or not to help. The story begins long ago in the celestial realms where Avalokiteshvara practiced deeply and tirelessly. Lifetime after lifetime, he worked to free beings from suffering. He taught, he healed, he carried, he wept, and still the suffering did not end. Every time a life was soothed, 10 more were in pain. Every time one was saved, another was lost. One day, Avalokiteshvara stood at the edge of reality and looked down upon the world. He heard every cry, every mother losing a child, every man begging for bread, every animal caught in a trap, every being trapped in anger, desire, confusion. And in that moment, his heart broke. Not figuratively, it shattered. His body split into pieces, his head burst into 11 parts, his arms cracked and fell. His vow seemed too vast, the pain of others too great. And from the silence that followed, he wept. "I have failed," he whispered. "I cannot save them all." But the universe listens in strange ways, and just as Avalokiteshvara reached the edge of despair, a light appeared. Amida Buddha, the Buddha of infinite light, came forth. Gently, patiently, lovingly. He gathered the pieces. He said nothing of failure, only this: "You broke not from weakness, but because your compassion was real." And with a soft breath, Amida blessed Avalokiteshvara's broken form and transformed it. Now he had 11 heads to see in every direction and 1,000 arms, each with an eye in its palm to both see and act. Hands that could reach into every corner of the world. Hands that could soothe, protect, feed, carry, hold, mend. Not all hands were soft. Some held weapons to cut through illusion. Others held lotus flowers to cradle the broken. Some formed mudras of peace. Others reached out with empty palms. Each hand was compassion expressed. Each hand was love in action. This is why Avalokiteshvara did not abandon the world. Because even in despair, he did not turn away. Because real compassion isn't about success. It's about showing up again and again, even when it seems hopeless. Especially when it seems hopeless. There's a story told in temples. A monk once asked a master, "What is Avalokiteshvara doing with so many arms and eyes?" The master replied, "It's like a man reaching for a pillow in the night. He does it without thinking." That is the heart of compassion. No calculation, no pride, just the instinct to help. Because suffering is not theoretical. It is immediate, and so compassion must be too. In the iconography, each hand of Avalokiteshvara holds a symbol. A wheel, a bell, a jewel, a book, a rope, a vajra, a bowl, a tear. Because compassion wears many forms. Sometimes it's guidance, sometimes it's protection, sometimes it's nourishment, sometimes it's just being with someone who is grieving without fixing it. In one form, Avalokiteshvara appears with only 2 hands. One holds a lotus, symbol of purity rising from the mud. The other holds a vase, pouring the nectar of healing into the world. Because even with just 2 hands, if moved by compassion, you can save lives. In the Mahayana tradition, to walk the Bodhisattva path is to walk in Avalokiteshvara's footsteps, to take the vow, not for glory, not for escape, but for others, for the one crying next door, for the stranger across the world, for the part of yourself still in pain. There's a saying, when compassion truly arises, there is no I helping you, only the act itself. That is Avalokiteshvara, not a being to worship, but a mirror, a reminder of what you already are. When you listen with your whole body, when you act before being asked, when you feel another's pain like your own and still choose to love, you become one of the 1,000 hands. Commentary. This story is not mythology, it's instruction. You may not have 1,000 arms, but you have one. You may not have an eye in every palm, but you have awareness, and that is enough. Avalokiteshvara broke not from weakness, but from caring too much, and instead of being punished for it, he was expanded. His brokenness became his beauty. His sorrow became his vow. So if you ever feel too tender for this world, if you feel like your heart breaks too easily, you are not broken. You are awakening. You are listening. You are already walking the path of Avalokiteshvara. There was once a wealthy man who lived in a great house. The house was vast, with many rooms, winding corridors, tall beams and ancient wood. But it was old and dry, and one day it caught fire. Smoke slipped beneath the doors, flames curled along the rafters, the walls creaked with heat, and the embers began to rise. Inside the house were his children, dozens of them, laughing, playing, unaware. He called out to them from the courtyard, "Come out, the house is burning." But the children only blinked. The house was all they had known. It was familiar, full of games and colors and corners to hide. They did not see the danger. They did not feel the urgency. They went on playing. The man's heart pounded. The flames licked closer. If he shouted again, they might ignore him. If he ran in to fetch them, the structure might collapse. So instead, he tried something else. He called out again, not with panic, but with a new offer. "Children, come outside. There are carts waiting for you. Goat carts, deer carts, ox carts, pulled by beautiful animals adorned with bells and gold. Come now, and they are yours." The children stopped, looked up, and ran out of the burning house in delight. Safe, laughing, alive. But when they reached the courtyard, there were no goat carts or deer carts. Only one great cart, drawn by a white ox, sturdy, wide, strong, more magnificent than they could have imagined. And the father, calm now, relieved, invited each child onto the cart. It would carry them far from danger. It would hold them safely. This is the parable of the burning house, one of the most famous teachings in the Lotus Sutra. It is not about deception. It is about skillful means, what Mahayana Buddhism calls upaya. It is about the wisdom to speak not with rigid truth, but with compassion shaped to the listener's heart. The father in the story is the Buddha. The burning house is samsara, the world of illusion, suffering, impermanence. The children are us, unaware, absorbed in our games, our distractions, our beliefs that everything is fine. And the carts? They are the paths, the ways we are called out of delusion. Sometimes we need promises. Sometimes we need symbols. Sometimes we come to practice seeking peace or healing or clarity. These may not be ultimate truth, but they are ways out of the fire. And the Buddha, seeing this, offers whatever will work, not to lie, but to save. Truth is not always about telling the whole thing at once. Sometimes it's about offering a step forward, a thread through the smoke, a voice that reaches someone where they are, not where they should be. There is a famous Mahayana saying, "The Dharma is like a raft used to cross the river, but once across, you don't carry the raft on your back." In the same way, the Buddha does not cling to doctrines. He uses teachings as tools and discards them when they no longer serve. In the story, the children are not punished for believing in goat carts, because the Buddha is not interested in being right. He is interested in awakening, and if it takes a golden bell or a beautiful cart to bring someone to safety, then so be it, because wisdom without compassion is incomplete. Sometimes we do the same. We come to practice for small reasons. We want to breathe better, to sleep more easily, to escape stress, but slowly, something shifts. The real ox cart arrives. The deeper teachings come. We begin to see the house for what it is. We begin to wake up, not just from the flames, but from the idea that we ever truly belonged inside them. This story teaches us about timing, about patience, about knowing that not every truth needs to be told at once, and that helping others awaken is not about shouting, "The house is on fire." It's about seeing what they hear, what they fear, what they love, and then speaking to that. The Buddha could have thundered teachings from the sky. He could have demanded obedience. Instead, he walked with people, listened, adapted, and then gave them the vehicle they were ready for. Some criticize this parable. They say, "Wasn't it a lie?" But what matters is the result. The children were safe, and the vehicle they received was not lesser, but greater. They were drawn to joy, but found liberation. Sometimes a mother tells a child there are stars hiding behind the clouds, not to mislead, but to soothe. And the stars are there. Sometimes a doctor gives medicine sweetened with honey, because healing must be palatable, not just potent. And so too with the Dharma, it meets us where we are, and leads us to where we didn't even know we could go. The burning house is this world, not because the world is evil, but because it cannot last. Everything inside it, pleasure, power, possession, even identity, will one day fall. But the Buddha doesn't shame us for being inside. He simply calls us out, however he can. You may be on a goat cart path now, or waiting by the door, or still deep inside the house, holding on to something you love. It's okay. You are seen, and when you're ready, there will be a voice, and a cart, and a way through the smoke. As we move deeper into the quiet teachings of Zen, we come to a story about seeing clearly and understanding true value. Listen carefully to the next story. In a mountainside monastery carved from stone and silence, there lived a monk known for his rage. He was not a novice, not undisciplined, not cruel, but when the fire came, it came fast, like wind through dry leaves, like lightning on still water. His name was Anjan. Years before, he had left behind a life of status and noise. a wealthy merchant's son. He had walked away from gold, from servants, from praise. He shaved his head, took the robe, entered the path, and tried to be still. But stillness did not come easily. Not for him. While other monks sat like stones in meditation, Anjun's thoughts raced. While others bowed gently in morning light, his mind bristled at small slights, careless words, slow movements. He clenched his teeth, gripped his mala beads too tightly, snapped at those who asked too many questions, and always afterward, he regretted it. One morning, a young monk accidentally spilled tea on his robes. Anjun stood. His voice rose like thunder in the sacred hall. "You call this mindfulness?" The novice bowed deeply, trembling, but the damage had been done. Silence followed, heavy and sharp. That evening, the abbot summoned Anjun. He did not scold, did not instruct. He simply handed Anjun a small, empty bowl. "Hold this," he said, and walked to the old pine tree at the edge of the cliff. "Sit there until the bowl is full." Anjun blinked. "The bowl is empty." The abbot nodded. "Fill it with stillness." So Anjun went. The pine tree stood crooked against the sky, its needles sharp as whispers, its trunk weathered by time. Anjun sat beneath it, bowl in lap, confusion in heart. How could he fill a bowl with something that couldn't be seen? Hours passed. Birds called. Clouds shifted. His legs ached. Still the bowl remained, empty. Still his thoughts churned. "This is foolish. I should be studying. They're laughing at me back at the monastery." The fire stirred again, that old familiar heat. He stood up, ready to leave, but paused, and for the first time, he looked. At the bowl, at the tree, at the sky opening quietly beyond the cliffs, and something softened, not a release, but a noticing that his mind was loud and the world was not. He sat again, not to succeed, not to prove, but just to be. Days passed. He returned each morning, sometimes with anger, sometimes with peace, sometimes with tears, always with the bowl. He began to notice his breath. Not control it, just notice. He began to feel his thoughts, not as commands, but as weather. They came, they went. One day, a beetle crawled across the bowl's rim. Anjun did not flinch, did not swat it away. He watched it, felt its tiny weight, its gentle effort, and whispered, "Thank you." Weeks later, he returned to the abbot. The bowl was still empty, but his eyes were not. They were clear, software still. The abbot smiled. "Did you bring what I asked for?" Anjun bowed. "I did not fill the bowl with stillness, but I emptied it of everything else." This is the story of the angry monk, and how fire, when met with space, becomes warmth. Commentary. Anger is not evil. It is energy. It is fire. And fire can cook food or burn down temples. The Dharma does not teach suppression. It teaches transformation. Anjun did not erase his anger. He sat with it. He saw its roots: fear, pride, expectation, and in seeing it clearly, he softened. You cannot calm your mind by force. You cannot force a bowl to fill with stillness. You can only stop stirring the water and wait until clarity returns on its own. We all carry bowls, and we all try to fill them with achievement, with reaction, with rightness, with control, but the wisest among us know. The real work is emptying, not to lose, but to make space. There's a Zen saying, let go or be dragged. You don't have to destroy your fire. Just give it space, let it breathe, let it teach you what stillness really means. And remember, stillness does not mean absence of movement, it means absence of resistance. Like a tree that sways but does not break. Like a bowl that reflects the sky because it does not try to. Let your bowl be empty, and in that emptiness, find peace. High in the hills above a quiet town, there stood a temple. Its walls were weathered by wind and time. Its steps worn smooth by generations of sandals. Its prayer flags faded but still fluttering. And in its tallest tower hung a bell. Massive, bronze, perfectly cast. It had been gifted by a distant king centuries ago. Carried up the mountain by oxen and monks, polished each year, respected, admired, but never rung, not once. The bell had a name, Resonance of the Mountain. Inscribed around its rim were words in a forgotten tongue. It was said to hold the most beautiful sound ever forged, so pure, so deep, that it would quiet all suffering for a moment. But no one had ever heard it, because the abbot long ago had made a vow, let the bell only ring when the world is ready to listen. And so it waited and waited. Pilgrims climbed the hill just to see it. Children dared each other to touch the rope, but none pulled. It became a symbol of restraint, of mystery, of potential, and eventually, of silence too deep to question. One day, a novice asked the elder monk, "Why don't we ring it?" The monk shrugged, because it was meant to be rung, but never was. The novice frowned. Then what's the point of its sound? The monk looked out at the horizon and replied, "You tell me." The story of the bell spread like smoke, and in time, people began to wonder how many other bells go unrung, not made of bronze, but of possibility. There was a painter who never showed her art, a musician who kept every song in his notebook, a teacher who knew how to heal but doubted her voice, a young man who wrote letters he never sent, a woman who forgave but never said the words aloud. Each of them had a bell, hanging in the tower of their own life, polished, admired, imagined, but never heard. This is the parable of unused potential. The Dharma teaches us about impermanence, yes, but also about urgency, not frantic urgency, but gentle, clear truth. This life will not wait forever, and the sound in you deserves to be shared. The bell was never rung, not because it couldn't be, but because someone was waiting for perfect conditions, for absolute certainty, for a sign. But life rarely gives signs, only moments, and you must choose to meet them. There is a Zen story of a man who stands beside a river. He thirsts, but waits for the perfect reflection to appear on the surface before drinking. He dies with water at his feet. What sound do you carry within you? What truth, what offering, what kindness left unsaid, what creation unwritten, What forgiveness unopened? Letting your bell ring does not require a crowd. It doesn't need approval. It doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be true and shared. One evening, a new abbot arrived at the temple. She had studied the bell's history, had bowed to it many times. And then, one spring morning, as the valley bloomed, she climbed the tower and pulled the rope. The sound that followed was not loud, not shocking, but profound. It rolled through the mountains like a low tide, clear, mournful, joyful, full. Birds rose into the air, monks paused mid-step. Villagers lifted their heads from bowls and windows, and in that moment, everything was still. Not because they heard something new, but because they heard something they had always carried inside. Then the bell was silent again. But something had changed. The abbot later said, "A bell is not meant to be perfect. It is meant to be heard. And so are we." Commentary. This parable asks a quiet but urgent question. What are you holding back? Not out of wisdom, but out of fear. The sound in you may not end suffering. It may not change the world, but it may change a moment. It may reach one person. It may free your own breath, and that is enough. We often wait for permission, for clarity, for mastery, for the right time. But the bell does not ask, "Will I be understood?" It asks, "Will I be true?" The world is filled with unwritten books, unsung songs, unspoken love, unrung bells, and it is not failure to stay silent, but it is loss of what could have been shared, loss of what someone else needed to hear, even if only once. You don't have to shout. You don't have to perform. You just have to let your voice exist, to let the truth you carry move from silence into air. So ring your bell, tell your story, share your art, speak your heart, forgive, laugh, cry, begin again, even if your voice shakes, even if your hands tremble, even if no one claps. Let the sound live outside of you. Let it ripple. Let it go. Because a silent bell may be beautiful, but only a ringing bell is alive. In the days when animals still spoke the language of the wind and trees, there lived a turtle in a wide, sparkling pond near the edge of a small village. The water was clean. The lilies bloomed. Dragonflies shimmered like tiny blades of light, and frogs sang in harmony beneath the moon. And in the center of it all, floating lazily on a flat, sun-warmed rock, was a turtle with a sharp mind and a sharper tongue. He was clever, observant, wise even, but he had one weakness. He could not stop talking. This turtle, who in a past life had been the Buddha, spent his days offering advice to fish, telling stories to tadpoles, and correcting the herons who perched too long on the reeds. He spoke of the stars, of the weather, of the foolishness of men and the arrogance of birds. And many listened at first. But over time, some began to swim a little farther from his rock. The frogs coughed politely and leapt away. Even the dragonflies found quieter lily pads to rest on. Still, the turtle spoke. He spoke when no one was near. He spoke when others slept. He spoke not to be heard, but because silence felt like drowning. One summer, the rains did not come. The sky cracked but gave no water. The pond shrank. Lilies withered. The fish moved deeper, their numbers fewer each day. 2 wild geese, passing overhead, noticed the shrinking pond and circled down. They landed beside the turtle and dipped their beaks in the muddy shallows. "This place won't last much longer," one said. "Soon it will be dry." The other nodded. "We should help whoever we can." The turtle, curious, swam closer. "Help? How?" The first goose blinked. "We will carry the small fish to deeper waters, and if you like, we can carry you too." The turtle's eyes widened. "You would do that?" "Of course," said the second goose, "but only if you can stay silent." "Silent?" the turtle echoed. "Yes," said the first. "We will hold a stick between our beaks. You must bite down on the center and hold on. But if you speak, even one word, you'll fall." The turtle hesitated. Not talk? For an entire journey? He looked around. The pond was shrinking. His friends were gone. The mud cracked beneath the sun. He took a breath. "Very well," he said. "I will be silent." The next morning, the geese returned with a sturdy stick. They each gripped one end in their beaks. The turtle bit down on the center with determination. Together, they rose into the sky, wings strong, the turtle dangling like a pendant between them. He had never seen the world like this before. Forests stretched like ocean waves. Rivers wound like silver ropes. Hills rolled beneath them like sleeping beasts. And far below, people looked up and pointed. "Look!" a child cried. "A flying turtle!" Laughter rippled through the village. A man shaded his eyes. "What a strange sight! A turtle who thinks he's a bird!" They laughed louder. They clapped and jeered. The turtle heard every word. His mouth tightened on the stick. He thought of clever comebacks, of biting remarks, of lessons he could teach these fools from above. And then he couldn't help himself. "I'll show you who's foolish." But the moment his mouth opened, he fell. Down, down through the sky, tumbling through wind and silence and regret until he struck the earth and never rose again. The geese circled once, then flew on. And below, the villagers stood in stunned silence beside the broken shell of the creature who could not stay silent. Later, when this tale reached the forest monasteries, a monk asked the Buddha, "Was the turtle's mistake pride?" "No," said the Buddha, "it was attachment. Not to his body, but to his voice, to the belief that every thought must be shared." He looked at the monk kindly. "There is wisdom in knowing when to speak, but greater wisdom in knowing when not to." And so, the story of the turtle who couldn't stop talking passed from village to village. Not as mockery, but as reminder that words are like seeds. They grow even when we forget we've planted them, and some, if spoken at the wrong time, can fall like stones. Because restraint is not weakness. It is strength disguised as silence. And sometimes, silence is the loudest wisdom of all. With each step on the Zen path, a new lesson unfolds. Now we turn to a story about recognition, of self, of others, and of what truly matters. Listen carefully to the next story. The river was wide and still, glass-like beneath the pale morning sky. Mist hovered just above the surface, curling and drifting like breath from a sleeping world. A single heron stood motionless at the water's edge, waiting for the ripples to still. On the far bank, the Buddha walked slowly toward the shore. His robe was the color of earth after rain, simple, unstained. In his hand, he carried only his bowl, and in his eyes there was a depth that made even the wind seem to pause. The monks had already gathered beneath the Bodhi trees. Some sat cross-legged on dry leaves. Others stood in quiet reflection, watching the river. Today's teaching would not be long, nor loud, but it would be remembered. The Buddha stepped to the edge of the river and sat upon a low stone. The current moved slowly behind him, and in that quiet, he told a story. There was once a man, he said, who lived by a river much like this one. Every morning he bathed at dawn. Every evening he listened to the wind hum through the reeds. And one day, as he meditated near the shore, he saw a small boat drifting toward him. A few monks turned their heads toward the water as if expecting to see it. The boat was empty, the Buddha continued. No oars, no sail, just a simple wooden vessel carried by the current. The man smiled. There was peace in its stillness. No demands, no conversation, no self to disturb the quiet. But weeks later, the Buddha said, as he sat again near the water, another boat appeared. It drifted toward him, slow, gentle, and quiet as before. He raised his hand slowly, but this time, there was a man in it. The listeners grew still, and as the boat drew closer, it veered slightly, striking the meditating man with a soft bump. The Buddha paused, and the man leapt up, furious. Some of the younger monks blinked. He shouted, the Buddha said. He scolded the other. He demanded to know why he had not steered, why he had disturbed his peace. There was a silence in the air now, a silence of recognition. But when the first boat struck him, when it was empty, he felt no anger. There was no one to blame, no insult to receive, no self to defend. He turned toward the water. Anger arises, he said, when we see another as the cause of our suffering, when we believe we have been wronged, when the self rises to declare, this should not have happened to me. The monks were very quiet now. But what if we saw all boats as empty? He asked. A breeze moved through the tall grasses. Somewhere, a bird called out once, then fell silent again. When another insults you, the Buddha said, they too are being carried by a current of pain, confusion, fear, conditioning. Just as the boat was moved by the river, they are moved by the winds of ignorance. He let the words settle. To shout at an empty boat, he said, is to shout at the river, to push the current with your hands, to exhaust yourself against what was never personal. A monk near the front, young, eager, lifted his gaze. His name was Tissa, and he had recently quarreled with another monk over the rules of chanting. Blessed One, he asked, but if someone harms us, deliberately, cruelly, is that not different than an empty boat? The Buddha nodded. Yes, intention matters, but even those who intend harm are caught in currents they do not fully see. He looked gently at Tissa. The man who lashes out is often protecting a wound. The woman who lies is often afraid. And when you react with anger, You are caught in your own boat, convinced it has a captain, steering by will. A senior monk, older with a weathered face and a calm demeanor, bowed slightly. I have learned, Lord, to hold my tongue, but the self still burns inside. I smile while feeling the fire of pride, of injury. The Buddha smiled gently. Then you have seen the fire. That is the first step. He reached down and picked up a small pebble. When a boat is struck, the water ripples, but it returns to stillness if we do not stir it further. He placed the stone down. Do not pretend there is no fire, but do not feed it. Watch it. Know its shape. See how it arises. And know this: it does not belong to you. The river flowed steadily behind them. A real boat now passed in the distance, its oars dipping quietly, evenly. You are not the boat, the Buddha said. You are not the current. You are not even the river. He looked to the horizon where the morning sun had begun to rise. You are the witness, the space through which all of it flows. A few monks closed their eyes. To let go of the self is not to disappear, he said. It is to stop clinging to what is not you, the story, the injury, the name Dot. He drew a shape in the sand beside him, an open circle. When you no longer need to be right, you listen differently. When you no longer need to be seen, you observe. When you let go of I and mine, peace is not something you chase, it is what remains. That night, as the wind cooled and the scent of lotus drifted on the breeze, the monk sat beside the river. Tissa approached the elder monk he had quarreled with, bowed deeply, and said nothing. No apology, no defense, just the stillness of an empty boat. The elder bowed in return, and in that silence, something greater was restored. In the years that followed, the teaching of the empty boat would spread like a soft echo, across rivers, over mountains, into cities and quiet huts. Not as doctrine, but as insight. That much of what we suffer is born from the illusion of a fixed self. That the insult, the injustice, the anger are often just ripples in a river that does not know your name. And when you learn to see each passing vessel as empty, not meaningless but free of blame, then you too can drift more lightly. Letting go, not to vanish, but to float. Still, aware, unmoved by the waves of the world. Like the Buddha that morning by the river, watching everything and holding nothing, the boy stood barefoot in the dust. Beyond the village, where the rice paddies gave way to forest, he searched. The sun hung low, casting long shadows through the bamboo groves. A wind stirred the leaves, but he did not move. His eyes scanned the ground for tracks, for broken twigs, for any sign of the ox. He had lost it, or perhaps he had never truly found it. And so began the journey, not of chasing, but of remembering. In Zen tradition, the ox-herding pictures are a series of 10 images, each one a moment in the path toward awakening, not literal, not linear, but true in the way that poetry is true. They begin with a search. A boy looking for an ox. But the ox is not made of flesh. It is the self, the mind, the original nature. The Buddha within, hidden beneath thought, lost in distraction, masked by craving. And the boy, He is all of us. First, searching for the ox, the boy leaves the village. He's tired of ordinary life. He's heard rumors of peace, of awakening, of something real beneath the noise. So he begins to search. He reads sutras, he listens to teachers, he sits in meditation. But his mind is full of fog. Thoughts crowd his vision. Doubt clings like vines. Still, he continues, because something inside him knows there is more than this. 2. Seeing the traces. One morning, while gathering wood, he sees a bent stalk, then a hoof print in the mud. His heart jumps. Maybe I'm close. He kneels, follows the signs. In his practice, he notices moments of stillness. A breath that feels vast, a silence that doesn't feel empty. Just hints, traces, but enough to give him hope. 3. Catching sight of the ox. Suddenly, there it is, a glimpse through the trees, a flash of black hide, a tail flick. The boy freezes, joy rises, and fear. Because now it's real, not just a concept, not just a goal. The ox exists, but it is wild. It does not come when called, and when the boy steps closer, it bolts. 4th, catching the ox. He runs, he sweats, he stumbles. At last, he grabs the rope. The ox bucks, throws its weight against him. It drags him through the grass. But he holds tight. This is the phase of discipline, of hard practice, of struggling with the mind that wants to flee. It takes effort, structure, ritual. Again and again he pulls the ox back, until finally it yields. Not because it is broken, but because it begins to trust. 5. Taming the ox. Now he walks beside it, still holding the rope but not fighting. He brushes its coat, feeds it grain. They sit together beneath a tree. This is calm abiding. Meditation deepens. The mind, once unruly, now rests beside him like a friend. Joy rises, not from excitement, but from peace. 6. Riding the ox home. The boy climbs on its back. He plays the flute as they travel. There's laughter now. The ox no longer resists. They are one motion, one rhythm, the self and the selfless walking home together. Some think this is the end, but it is not. There is more, always more. 7. The ox transcended. One morning, he wakes, and the ox is gone. Not lost, gone, dissolved. Because there was never a separate ox, only the illusion of separation. There is no one taming another, no duality, only being, only suchness. The boy sits in silence, and everything is enough. 8. Both ox and self forgotten. Now, not even the boy remains. No watcher, no watched. Just sky, wind, movement without mover, compassion without identity, peace without object. This is awakening. Not a peak to climb, but a dissolving of the climber. 9. Returning to the source. But even this is not the end. He returns to the world, to the place he left behind. The village, the noise, the errands. He no longer seeks to escape it. Because the sacred is here too, in the washing of bowls, in the crying of babies, in the marketplace and the broom. 10th, entering the marketplace with open hands. He walks through the village, dirty feet, laughing eyes, no halo, no robe, just a man carrying firewood and smiling at children. He does not preach, does not speak of truth. He simply helps, lends a hand, bows to beggars, listens without interrupting, because he carries nothing and gives everything. Commentary: the ox herding. Pictures are not a ladder, they are a mirror. We move forward, then fall back, then forward again. Sometimes we glimpse the ox for a moment, then lose it for years. And that's okay, because the journey is not about getting somewhere. It's about seeing clearly where we are. The boy is not special. He is not a saint. He is you. Waking up slowly, letting go gently, returning home freely, and realizing it was never the ox that was missing, only the one who thought it was separate. At the edge of a quiet village stood a grove of bamboo. Tall, slender, green like fresh thought. Children played between the stalks. Lovers carved initials in their husks. The wind passed through them like a flute, and they bent, bowed, never snapped. Even in the worst monsoons, when roofs were torn and trees cracked in two, the bamboo always remained, not by resisting, but by yielding. The villagers took comfort in them, the way they swayed without fear, the way they seemed to whisper, "It is okay to move with what comes." One year, a powerful storm swept through the valley, the kind that arrives with no warning, just a sudden hush, then a roar like sky breaking. Palm trees were flung sideways. The great banyan lost a limb, crops flattened, roofs lifted like paper, and yet, in the morning light, the bamboo still stood, drenched, bent, but alive. An old monk named Tenzin watched from his hut on the hill. After the storm passed, he gathered his students and led them to the grove. He said nothing at first, just stood beside the bamboo. One student broke the silence. "Master, how did these survive?" Tenzin smiled. "The bamboo," he said, "has no pride in its strength, only trust in its roots and the wisdom to bend." Another student frowned. "But isn't bending the same as giving in?" Tenzin tapped one stalk gently with his hand. "Does this feel weak to you?" The bamboo swayed slightly, not from impact, just from being what it is. "No," he continued, "bending is not defeat. It is relationship. To wind, to time, to life, to understand that resisting everything is how things break." The students were quiet. Tenzin knelt beside one stalk, pressed his hand to the wet earth. "There is a lesson here," he said softly. "The strong oak is proud until lightning splits it. The mountain stands tall until earthquake shakes it. But the bamboo, it lives by letting go of control. It knows the storm will not ask permission, so it dances instead of breaking." Later that week, a young woman in the village fell ill. Severe, sudden. The doctor said it would be weeks before she could walk again. She was bitter, frustrated. Tenzin visited her, sat beside her without judgment. And after a long silence, he said, "You're in a storm now. You cannot control the wind, but you can soften. Not give up, just give in. To healing, to stillness, to time." She cried, And in that surrender, healing began. Months passed, the village rebuilt. The trees grew back slowly, but the bamboo never changed much. It didn't need to, because it had already learned what others forgot, that survival is not always about standing firm. Sometimes it's about moving with grace. There is a line in a Zen poem: "Be like bamboo, deep-rooted, open-jointed, hollow-hearted. What bends does not break, what yields is not weak, and what allows itself to sway teaches us what it means to stay." As our exploration of Zen Buddhism deepens, let us listen to a story that reveals how true worth is often overlooked. Here starts the next story. At the edge of the monastery was a pond, small, shallow, ringed with moss-covered stones. No fish swam in it, no lilies bloomed. It was quiet, so quiet you could hear dragonflies land on its surface. The monks would pass it daily on the way to morning meditation. Most gave it no thought. But one monk, young, curious, still a little wild in the heart, began to stop beside it each dawn. He would pick up a pebble, hold it, feel its weight, then toss it gently into the still water, and each time he would watch the ripples move outward, soft circles expanding from the center until they kissed the edges of the pond and vanished. One morning, the head teacher stood beside him. "You throw a pebble every day," he said. "Why?" The young monk didn't answer at first. Then he said, "I think I'm watching how something so small still affects everything." The teacher smiled, bent down, picked up his own stone, and said, "Every thought, every word, every action is a pebble in the pond of life." Then he let it fall. Ripples. The young monk began to understand that karma is not punishment or reward. It's simply the rippling of causes. What you do echoes. What you think spreads. Even in silence, something moves outward from you. That evening, while sweeping the courtyard, the young monk accidentally knocked over a jug of water. It splashed against the steps of the shrine. He froze, panicked, but the teacher, watching nearby, only nodded. "You see," he said, "another ripple, but not all ripples are wrong, just seen." The monk began to practice more carefully, not just his posture, but his thoughts. He noticed how anger, even when not spoken, changed the air around him. How a quiet smile offered to a passerby lingered like incense. One day, a traveler came to the monastery, troubled, distracted, unable to sit still during meditation. The young monk didn't say much, just poured him tea, listened, and as the man left, bowed gently. Later, the traveler returned, calmer. He said, "I don't know what helped me, but something about your silence made me feel still." A ripple. Not grand, not loud, just a movement born from presence. There is a story in Zen. A student asked, "How do I change the world?" The teacher replied, "Change the shape of the stone you drop into it." The young monk continued to visit the pond, but now he didn't throw pebbles each day. Sometimes he just sat, watching the water hold its breath. Because he understood now, it's not always about making ripples. Sometimes it's about learning to be still enough to feel them The full moon rose slowly over the temple pond. Its pale light spilled across the stone paths, kissed the tips of bamboo leaves, and finally rested on the water surface. Perfect, round, and still. A quiet hush fell over the garden. Even the crickets seemed to pause. It was as if the world had stopped breathing, just long enough to notice the moon. But what the monks gathered around the pond saw was not the real moon. It was only a reflection. A novice named Kaoru sat cross-legged near the water's edge. She had come to meditate, but found herself staring at the luminous circle. It shimmered with every ripple. It danced when the breeze blew. It fractured into 1,000 pieces when a frog leapt across. And yet, when the pond stilled again, there it was, whole, unmoved, unaffected. The head monk, Master Renji, approached quietly. He sat beside her without a word. For a while they both watched. Finally, Kaoru whispered, "It looks so real." Renji nodded. "It does." She tilted her head. "But it's not. It's just light." Renji smiled. "Is your reflection in the mirror not you?" Kaoru hesitated. "I don't know. It looks like me, but it's not me." "Then what is it?" he asked. "A copy," she guessed. Renji turned to her. "And what is your idea of yourself?" She blinked. "A reflection." Renji picked up a small stone. He held it above the pond, then let it fall. Plop! The moon shattered again. 1,000 tiny moons danced outward on the ripples. "Does the moon mind?" he asked. Kaoru laughed softly. "No." "Does the moon change?" "No," she said again. Renji looked at her gently. "Then let your mind be the sky, not the water. The moon is always whole, whether you see it clearly or not." That night, Kaoru wrote in her journal, "I chase shadows. I polish reflections. I mistake the moon in the water for the truth." The next morning, during temple chores, Kaoru knocked over a bowl. It shattered. Clay and rice spilled across the floor. She gasped. But instead of panic, she remembered the moon. A fellow novice scolded her. She bowed, cleaned the mess. Inside, she felt no shame. Only the quiet smile of someone who had seen a truth. Weeks later, a guest philosopher visited the temple. He asked the monks, "What is real?" Some spoke of emptiness, others of causes and conditions. One offered the Heart Sutra. But when the question came to Kaoru, she said, "The moon and the water." She explained, "The moon is reality. The water is our mind. When our mind is still, reality reflects clearly. When disturbed, the image breaks, but not the truth." The philosopher nodded slowly. "That is poetic, but how do you know it's true?" Kaoru looked up. "Because when I stop chasing the reflection, I feel the light on my face." That night, Master Renji shared a final koan with the gathered monks. A monk asked, "Master, what is enlightenment?" The master pointed to the moon in the sky. Then he pointed to the moon in the water. Then he smiled. No answer, no explanation, just two moons. And the silence between them. There is a saying in Zen, "Do not mistake the finger pointing to the moon for the moon itself." And so the teachings end where they began, with a reflection. a still pond, a moon that never moved, and a student who finally stopped looking for herself in the ripples. The sun hung low over the fields, casting long golden shadows across the dry earth. At the edge of a quiet village, 2 mango trees stood side by side. One was tall and strong, its branches heavy with fruit. Its golden mangoes glowed in the light, plump, sweet and fragrant. Children would stop and stare. Travelers paused to admire. Birds sang in its branches as if drawn to its beauty. The other tree was bare. Its bark was worn, its limbs crooked. It bore no fruit, and no one stopped beneath its shade. But this second tree, quiet, unnoticed, was the Buddha in one of his past lives. And this is the story of why he chose to remain fruitless, for the sake of something greater. Long ago, the land had been wild. The forest grew thick around a small monastery where a humble sage lived with his disciples. He taught them to observe closely, to see not just what was obvious, but what was true. One morning, while walking through the woods, the sage turned to his students and pointed at 2 saplings growing side by side. "These trees," he said, "were born at the same time, but they will live very different lives." The students blinked. "They look the same," said one. The sage only smiled. "Wait." And the years passed. The first tree grew fast. Its branches stretched wide. Its roots drank deep from the stream nearby. And when its first mangoes came, the villagers discovered them. Sweet as honey, smooth as silk. They came in crowds. Children climbed its limbs. Merchants took its fruit to sell in town. Goats rubbed their backs against its bark. Travelers broke its twigs for kindling. Even the birds, once gentle, began to peck at its flowers for their scent. And still, the tree gave. But over time, it began to lean. A branch cracked under a child's foot. Its roots loosened from the trampling of cattle. The fruit became harder to grow, and some seasons it had none at all. Still, the people came. The second tree grew quietly. It bore no fruit. No children climbed it. No travelers plucked its leaves. Birds rested gently in its shade but never stayed long. The villagers ignored it. But its bark stayed smooth. Its roots grew deep. Its trunk remained upright and still. And it watched. One summer, the king of the region came to the forest on retreat. He set up camp near the fruiting tree. His cooks, servants, and soldiers lounged beneath its shade, praising its sweetness. Then, one of the ministers said, "If this tree has served so well, why not cut it down? The wood would make fine furniture. The fruit is nearly gone, but its trunk could be carved into chairs for your throne room." The king, intrigued, gave the order. And the next day, the great fruiting mango tree was felled. Its branches snapped, its trunk cracked open. Its roots, noble and deep, were torn from the earth, and all the forest fell silent. Later that week, the king walked through the woods again and saw the second tree, bare, small, and unremarkable. "What of that one?" he asked. His minister shrugged. "No fruit, no use, not even shade. Let it be." And so, it was spared. The sage, watching from a distance with his disciples, bowed slightly to the bare tree. "Do you see?" he said. "Sometimes what survives is not what shines the brightest, but what draws the least desire." The disciples looked at him with puzzled eyes. "But Master, was the fruiting tree not noble? Was its generosity not good? Yes, the sage said gently. It lived a life of service, and that is honorable. He looked toward the bare tree, but this one made a choice, a quiet choice. It saw what happened to its brother, and though it too could have borne fruit, it chose not to, for the sake of survival, for stillness, for watching without being consumed. Many lifetimes later, the Buddha would recount this story to his own monks. He would say, "There are times to serve and times to endure. There is merit in offering yourself to the world, and wisdom in stepping back, not from fear, but from foresight." And the story passed through generations, told to children not to make them afraid of giving, but to teach discernment, to remind them that not all service must be seen, that sometimes quiet restraint is a form of compassion too, because the world will always chase what glows, but sometimes what glows too brightly gets torn down, and what stands quietly survives to keep teaching. Continuing along the path of Zen insight, we pause now to hear a teaching about perception and hidden value. Listen carefully to the next story. Long ago, in a kingdom ringed by mountains and temples, a mighty king ruled from a palace of stone and gold. He was feared by his enemies, praised by poets, and followed by thousands. His armies stretched across the land. His wealth filled entire chambers, and his commands echoed through cities like thunder. But still, he was restless. Victory brought no peace. Praise faded quickly. Even sleep, wrapped in silk and guarded by soldiers, felt hollow. And so one morning, while gazing out across his kingdom from a marble balcony, the king spoke aloud. "Who in this world is greater than I?" A servant, sweeping quietly nearby, paused. "There is one," he said softly, eyes downcast. The king turned sharply. "Who?" "A sage," said the servant. "He lives alone in the forest, wears no crown, owns no gold. But they say he holds more peace in his silence than all your generals in battle." The king laughed. "A beggar in the woods, greater than me?" But something in the servant's voice lingered. And later that night, when the court had gone quiet, the king summoned his best horse and rode out alone, disguised in simple robes, his face shadowed by the hood of a traveler. He rode for 2 days, through thick jungle, across rivers, past farmers and monks and children who did not bow. Finally, at the edge of a still grove, he saw a small hut beneath a Bodhi tree, and outside it, seated cross-legged on a flat stone, was the sage. No guards, no roof over his head, no possessions, just stillness and eyes that did not flicker when the king approached. "You are the one they speak of?" the king asked. The sage nodded once. "I am one, of many." The king studied him. "You have no palace, no army, no throne, and yet people speak your name in reverence. Why?" The sage said nothing. The silence stretched, long enough for the king to feel his own voice echo. Finally, the sage opened his palm and motioned for the king to sit. The king hesitated, then obeyed. They sat together under the tree, as the wind moved gently through the leaves. No words, no commands, just presence. After a long while, the king said, "You are not afraid of me." "I see no king," said the sage, "only a man with questions." The king frowned, I have conquered lands, broken enemies, shaped history. You think I have questions?" The sage met his eyes. "Then why are you here?" The king opened his mouth, closed it, and looked away. Because beneath the silk, beneath the crowns, beneath the noise, he had come not to test the sage, but to understand something he could not command. Finally, he asked, "Why do people follow you?" "I do not ask them to." "Then why do they listen?" The sage picked up a small stone from the earth, rolled it in his fingers. "They listen," he said, "because I have no need for them to." The king blinked. "I lead armies, command cities, hold power over life and death, but still I'm not content." The sage nodded. "Because you mistake fear for respect, obedience for love, wealth for worth." The king stiffened. "Are you saying I am not powerful?" "I am saying," the sage said gently, "that true power does not cling, it does not shout, it does not fear being forgotten." They sat again in silence. The wind stirred the sage's robe. The king looked down at his hands. "I have everything," he said, "but still I feel empty." The sage smiled. "Then you are ready." "Ready for what?" "To lead without needing to be above." That evening, the king returned to his palace. No fanfare, no declaration, but something had changed. He began to listen more, to speak less, to ask questions instead of giving orders. His advisors whispered about his visits to temples, his long walks alone, his sudden interest in sitting beneath trees without speaking. And when his generals asked, "Who taught you this?" he said simply, "A man with nothing, who showed me everything." Years later, when the sage passed into silence beneath the same Bodhi tree, the king declared a day of stillness across the land. No work, no speech, just listening. And in time, his own rule became a story of its own, not because he expanded borders, but because he stopped needing to, not because he gained more, but because he learned to let go. And the story of the king and the sage spread like the breeze that once moved through the forest leaves. A reminder that the crown is not the source of power, wisdom is, and the one who does not seek to rule is often the one most worthy to lead. A monk once traveled alone through a deep forest. He'd been walking for days, through mud, through heat, through cold rain. He carried nothing but a worn robe, a begging bowl, and a satchel with a single stone inside. Why the stone? He could not say, only that a teacher once gave it to him and said, "Carry this until you understand its weight." The monk took it literally, and dutifully he carried the stone. At first, it seemed like nothing, but as the months passed, over hills, across rivers, through deserts, it began to burden him. His back ached, his hands calloused, his mind grew resentful. "Why must I carry this?" he muttered one evening, dropping beside a creek. He looked at the stone, round, dark, unremarkable. A simple weight, and yet it had become everything. That night, he slept beneath the stars, and he dreamed. In the dream, he stood in an endless field beneath a vast open sky. He held the stone tightly, afraid to drop it, afraid he might lose something important. Then a voice, calm and distant, whispered, "Are you carrying the stone, or is the stone carrying you?" He awoke just before dawn, heart racing. The sky above him was pale and soft, wide and light. He looked at the stone again and understood. This is the story of thoughts, identity, and the illusion of burdens, how what we cling to becomes our weight. Commentary. Many of us carry stones, regret, shame, an old story someone once told us about who we are, a wound we've wrapped ourselves around for so long it feels like identity. We think we're being strong, but strength is not clinging. It's knowing when to let go. The monk carried the stone because he trusted his teacher. But trust without inquiry is like walking in darkness without asking if there's a door. His real practice began not when he received the stone, but when he questioned it. The Buddha taught that suffering arises from attachment, even to things that seem noble, tradition, memory, belief, self-image. We say this is who I am, but who is saying it? And what happens when the self no longer fits? The stone was not the problem. The gripping was. The fear of what it meant to be without it. We carry pain from the past because we think dropping it means forgetting. We carry roles that no longer serve us because we think they are us. We carry anger because we think it protects us. But a clenched fist cannot hold the sky. Later that day, the monk stood on a hilltop and watched the clouds pass. He held the stone in both hands, not angrily, not resentfully, just with awareness, and then he set it gently on the ground, not thrown, not discarded, just returned. A breeze touched his robe. The clouds shifted. He took his next step, and it felt like the first. In that moment, he realized the sky had always been there, unbothered, unburdened, vast, and that somewhere along the way, he had confused being grounded with being weighed down. This is the nature of the mind. It can be like a stone, heavy, fixated, stuck in the past, or like the sky, open, vast, always able to hold the weather without becoming it. The monk never told others to drop their stones. He simply told this story and ended it with a question. What are you carrying that is carrying you? So, pause today. Look gently at the weight in your hands, your heart, your mind, and ask yourself, do I still need this to walk? Or have I mistaken the stone for my path? It was night when the master pointed. The moon hung low over the monastery roof, pale and full, casting silver light across the silent garden. A group of monks stood beside him, robes drawn tight against the wind. The master raised his hand and extended one finger toward the sky. "See that?" he said. The students nodded. "The moon." He shook his head. "Number that is the finger." Then he smiled softly. "And what it points to is the moon." The monks stood still, unsure. The wind moved the trees. The master lowered his hand and whispered, "Don't mistake the finger for the moon." This is one of the most repeated teachings in Zen, because the mind is hungry for signs, hungry for symbols, hungry for teachers, for teachings, for shapes and systems. It sees the finger and calls it truth, but the finger is just pointing. It is not the truth itself. Imagine you're lost in the forest. A guide lifts a lantern. You follow the light, but mistake the lantern for the destination. You begin polishing it, worshipping it, writing poems about its handle and flame. But you never leave the forest, because the lantern was not meant to be your home. It was meant to show you the path. That's what Zen does. It points. But if you hold too tightly to the pointing, you never arrive. Buddha's words, the sutras, the rituals, even meditation, they are fingers. Beautiful, wise, luminous fingers. But if you cling to them, if you name them truth, you stop short of the moon. A monk once asked his teacher, "What is the nature of ultimate reality?" The teacher held up a flower, just a flower. The monk bowed. He understood, because the flower was not the answer. It was the invitation to stop asking, to just see, to be. There's a story of a man crossing a river. The bridge is narrow, the current strong. Halfway across, he freezes, looks down at the water and panics. He shouts to a traveler behind him, "Help me understand this bridge." The traveler laughs gently. "You don't need to understand it," he says. "Just walk." Zen does not fear the unknown. It welcomes it, because the unknown is where truth lives. Not in definitions, but in direct experience. Not in the finger, but in the sky beyond it. Many people come to Zen hoping for words that explain. But the moment something is explained, it is no longer what it was. It becomes a concept, a mental model, and reality, true, breathing, silent reality, evaporates behind the map. Once, a young monk read every sutra he could find. He could recite the Eightfold Path, the 5 aggregates, the 4 noble truths. He knew Sanskrit terms. He quoted the Buddha with reverence. But he was restless. He asked his teacher, "Why do I still feel distant from awakening?" The teacher smiled and walked him outside. The moon was rising. The teacher pointed. The student followed the finger. "See it?" the teacher asked. "Yes," the monk said. "The moon." The teacher chuckled. "Number, that's still my finger." The monk blinked, and then, like a soft breeze over water, he understood. To point is not to possess. To teach is not to trap. Even the Buddha said, "My teachings are like a raft, meant to cross the river, not to carry on your back once you reach the shore." But many cling to the raft. They decorate it, argue over whose raft is best, then forget to cross. The finger and the moon, words and truth, map and terrain. All teachings are like this. Zen does not dismiss the finger, but it urges you not to stop there. Because no teacher can give you the moon. They can only point. The rest is silence, attention, direct seeing, commentary. This koan is not just about Zen. It is about how we relate to everything. A lover says, "I love you," and we cling to the phrase, replaying it in our minds. But the real love was in the look, in the moment, in the breath before the words. The words were the finger, the love was the moon. We read books about mindfulness, but forget to be mindful. We quote wise sayings, but live unawake. We chase spiritual techniques, but miss the moment itself. The way the light falls through leaves, the sound of tea being poured, the feel of wind on bare skin. These are the moon, director. Immediate, alive. When you sit in meditation, thoughts will rise. Names, labels, questions. That's the finger. Let it point. But keep looking beyond, to what has no name, no answer, only presence, only this, only now. If you walk away with only the finger, you miss everything. But if you let it lead you, quietly, gently, without clinging, you may one day look up and find yourself under the full moon, smiling, and no longer needing to explain why. As we drift deeper into the still waters of Zen, a quiet teaching begins to rise, one that speaks of clarity and of value not always seen. Listen gently now. The next story begins. In a bustling monastery near the edge of the forest, there stood a tall wooden ladder. It led nowhere in particular. It was propped against an old stone wall at the edge of the courtyard, half covered in moss, its rungs worn smooth by generations of use. But no one used it for repairs. No one climbed it to reach anything. It was part of a practice, a koan in physical form, a ritual passed down from teacher to student, without ever being fully explained. Each new monk during their first week was asked to climb the ladder. No instructions, no context, just climb. Some did so eagerly. Some hesitated. Some asked, "What's the point?" The elder monks would only smile and say, "You'll see." One by one, the novices ascended. Halfway up, some laughed. Some grew nervous. Some clung tightly and looked down, unsure why they were up there at all. And eventually they came down, some with a shrug, some with a question, some with a strange quiet in their chest. One student, clever and ambitious, asked to climb the ladder a second time, then a third. He began to climb it every morning, faster each time. He polished the rungs, measured his speed, counted steps. Soon, he believed himself the best climber in the monastery. "Look how steady I am," he told a fellow monk. "Look how others struggle, but I've mastered it." The old teacher heard him, but said nothing. Not yet. Then one foggy morning, the student climbed the ladder again. This time he brought a small bell and rang it proudly at the top, announcing his arrival to the courtyard below. The monks turned, some with amusement, some with discomfort. The old teacher approached and said quietly, "You've climbed very high, but have you noticed? There is nothing up there." The student frowned. "I climbed to improve myself," he said, "to rise above, to be better." The teacher looked at him kindly. "Then you are climbing a ladder of ego, and that ladder goes nowhere." The student froze. He looked down at the mossy stones below, at the monks who stood waiting, not judging. And in that moment, something in him cracked open. The teacher continued, "Each rung you climb thinking it makes you superior is another step away from what you truly are. Real growth does not make you taller than others. It makes you more able to kneel beside them." He descended slowly, for the first time, with no pride in his chest. Just breathe, just stillness, just a strange, welcome sense of returning to earth. This is the parable of the ladder of ego. In life, we often climb. Status, wealth, validation, mastery, spiritual progress, intellect, fame. Each rung promises something Now I'll be enough. Now they'll respect me. Now I can rest. But at the top, we often find nothing. No summit. No answer. Just more sky. The Buddha warned of this subtle trap. The ego does not always show itself through arrogance. Sometimes it appears as spiritual pride, as goodness that separates, as quiet superiority disguised as humility. True awakening is not a climb, it is a return, a coming back to the place where there is nothing to prove, no one to impress, no summit to reach, only presence, only now. There's an old Zen story. A young man asked a master, "How long until I am enlightened?" The master replied, 10 years. "And if I try very hard?" the student asked. 20, said the master. The harder we climb in pursuit of self, the farther we drift from what is not self. The more we grip the ladder, the more we miss the ground. Commentary. The ladder of ego is invisible, but heavy. It lives in comparison, in judgment, in the quiet belief, I'm a little better than them. Even in spiritual practice, it whispers, look how mindful I am. Look how patient I've become. Look how others still struggle. But real growth is silent. It doesn't need a bell at the top. It rings quietly in the heart and says, let go. You may climb, yes, but ask, why? If the climb brings you closer to compassion, keep going. If it takes you farther from others, come down. Sometimes the real practice is to descend, to sit beside, to listen, to walk with, not above. In the monastery courtyard, the ladder still stands, weathered, unused, but not forgotten. Now, it serves as a reminder, not of reaching, but of returning. There was once a monastery nestled in the cliffs above a wide, mist-covered valley. Travelers came from all over the land, seeking wisdom from the old abbot who lived at its heart. But no one ever entered without first passing through the gate of questions. It was a tall wooden door, weathered by time, bound in iron, and it never seemed to open, no matter how many times pilgrims knocked. Instead, beside the gate stood a young monk with a calm face and a single instruction. If you wish to pass, you must answer, what keeps you from entering? Some said, my sins. Others said, I'm not ready. One said, I'm too angry. Another said, I'm still seeking. To each answer, the monk bowed and said, return when you are not. And so the pilgrims would leave, some frustrated, some weeping, some silent. One day, a weathered traveler approached. She was older than most. Her robes were plain, her eyes clear. She stood before the gate and read the words carved above, liberation is here. Then she looked at the gate and realized there was no lock, no bolt, no bar, just a handle. She turned it. The door opened, and she walked through. The monk beside the gate only smiled, because the lesson had never been in the answer, it had been in the assumption. This is the story of liberation, not as something earned, but as something already available, once illusion falls away. Commentary. Most of us believe the door is locked, that we must be perfect first, clean first, worthy first, empty of anger or sadness, or self-doubt. But the Dharma does not wait for your perfection, it waits for your presence. The Buddha did not say, "You must transcend before you begin." He said, "See clearly." And in seeing, freedom unfolds. The gate of questions was never locked, but the mind said it was, because it clings to a self-image that believes, "I am not there yet. I am not enough. I am still broken." But brokenness too is part of the path, and sometimes it is the crack that lets the light through. Liberation is not far, it is not elsewhere. It is not earned, it is the moment you stop demanding anything of the moment and simply turn the handle. The traveler who opened the gate was not special. She had simply grown tired of pretending the barrier was real. She saw the door for what it was, just a door, and walked forward. The monks say the abbot greeted her without words, only a bow, because no celebration is needed for one who sees the obvious. This story is often told to new students when they first enter training. Some smile, some frown, but a few immediately stand up and walk to the edge of the room to check if the door is locked. And when it opens easily, you can always hear the soft laughter of awakening. So if you find yourself waiting for permission, waiting for a sign, waiting to be good enough to begin, ask, what if the door was never locked? What if I only needed to reach for it? And if your hand trembles, that's all right. Just turn the handle. The Dharma is not waiting behind it. The Dharma is the act of reaching. It began in the hush before dawn, when the breath of the world still rested and time itself seemed unsure whether to move forward. In the palace of Kapilavastu, marble pillars loomed like frozen trees, casting long shadows across the corridors. Every corner, every curtain, every tapestry whispered of wealth and beauty. But the prince, Siddhartha, had stopped hearing the music in it. He had seen what no prince was meant to see: old age, sickness, death, and a seeker who walked without fear. In the days that followed the four sights, Siddhartha moved through the palace like a man carrying a secret too heavy to name. He sat through the court banquets without appetite. He watched dancers move in silk, their feet light as feathers, but his thoughts moved heavier than stone. Yasodhara, his wife, had noticed his silence. She placed her hand gently over his, but it trembled. Rahula, their newborn son, reached for him with tiny fingers, but Siddhartha's eyes filled with both love and sorrow. He did not lack affection, he lacked answers. That night the moon hung low and golden in the sky, a silent witness to the choice being made within royal walls. The city of Kapilavastu lay sleeping, its gates shut, its guards at rest, its people dreaming of festivals and fortunes. But inside Siddhartha's chamber, there was no sleep. He stood over his son's cradle, his gaze long and quiet. Rahula stirred, then stilled again. Siddhartha touched the boy's cheek, memorizing the softness. A father's heart broke quietly inside him. A part of him longed to stay, to watch this child grow, to hold Yasodhara as the years passed. But another part of him, the deeper part, knew that to truly love them, he had to leave. Not for escape, not for abandonment, but to find an end to the suffering that would one day find them all. He crossed the chamber in silence, his footsteps bare. He passed the sleeping guards with a nod of gratitude. He paused once in the marble garden, where fountains trickled like stilled song. Stars wheeled above him in still constellations. Waiting at the outer gate was Channa, his loyal charioteer, and Kanthaka, his white horse who had carried him through battles, festivals, and boyhood rides under open skies. Siddhartha took one last look at the palace that had been his whole world. Then he nodded. No orders, no drums, no farewell speech, just stillness and the beginning of something eternal. Channa led them through side streets. Siddhartha's cloak billowed slightly in the breeze, though the air was warm. As they neared the city gates, it is said the gods themselves descended to still the sound of hooves and hinges. The gatekeeper slept on, unaware that the one who was born to inherit the throne was walking away from it forever. Miles passed beneath them, past farmlands and shrines, past temples and banyan trees, and as dawn neared, they reached the forest's edge. There, beneath a fig tree bathed in pale starlight, Siddhartha dismounted. He stepped away from the saddle and removed his crown. It was heavy, not in gold, but in memory. He untied his earrings and placed them gently in Channa's hands. Then, drawing his sword, he cut away his long, dark hair, symbol of his royalty, of his past. He let the strands fall into the wind. He removed his silken robes, folding them with reverence, and exchanged them for a simple cloth robe, earth-colored and plain. Then he turned to Channa. "Take Kanthaka home," he said softly. "Tell my father I have not left in rebellion, but in search of that which is beyond birth and death." Channa's eyes filled with tears. "My lord, may I not follow you?" Siddhartha placed a hand on his friend's shoulder. "You will serve the Dharma more by returning than by following. Go. Tell them I am not lost. Tell them I am becoming." It is said that Kanthaka cried as he was led away. Some say the noble horse died of grief, his heart broken by parting. Others say his spirit was reborn among the stars. But Siddhartha did not look back. Barefoot, stripped of every title and comfort, he stepped into the forest. Birds stirred in the canopy. Mist hung low over the earth. The world ahead was wild and wide, but in that moment, he felt lighter than he ever had. No walls, no servants, no titles, just breathe, and the path. He walked deeper, alone, the forest accepting him without question. He drank from rivers, sat beneath trees, listened to wind move through leaves. He began to study with sages and ascetics, learning from their fire rituals and their breath practices, their renunciations and their silences. He fasted until his ribs showed like shadows. He sat still until ants walked over his knees. But in all this, he remained watchful. For he knew that extreme indulgence had not brought peace. And now he saw that extreme denial did not either. His journey would continue, but it had already begun. The great departure was not just a leaving, it was a shedding. Not just of privilege, but of illusion. The prince became a wanderer. The air became a seeker, and the world, though it did not know it yet, was about to change. Because one man had dared to step outside the gates and walk silently, humbly toward truth. With each breath, we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen, where the smallest stone may hold the greatest truth. Here starts the next story. The scholar arrived at the mountain temple with a scroll under one arm and confidence in his step. He had studied the texts. He had debated sutras with masters across the provinces. He had published writings on logic and perception, emptiness and form. And now, at last, he wished to learn Zen. He was met by the abbot, an old man with tired eyes and steady hands. They sat on floor cushions beneath a wooden beam. The room smelled of old cedar and rain-damp stone. Outside, the wind stirred the pine needles. The abbot said nothing. The scholar bowed. "I have come to learn the true meaning of Zen." The abbot smiled and reached for the teapot. He poured and kept pouring. The cup filled, then overflowed. The tea spilled onto the tray, then the floor, pooling around the scholar's sleeve. "Master!" the scholar cried, pulling back. "The cup is full! No more will go in!" The abbot paused, then looked up, expression unchanged. "Exactly," he said. "If your cup is already full, how can I show you Zen?" That was the lesson. No parable, no verse, no philosophy, just tea and the quiet sound of too much. In Zen, this story is often the first told, because so many who come to the practice do so with answers already in hand. Certainties, systems, names for things that have no names. But Zen is not a path of addition. It is a path of subtraction, not filling up, but emptying out, so that what cannot be spoken can finally be seen. Later that evening, the scholar sat alone in the courtyard. The wind had shifted. The trees swayed like old dancers in the dark. He touched the wet sleeve of his robe, still stained from the spilled tea. He thought of how much effort he had made, years of memorizing, comparing, analyzing. And now, a cup of tea had undone him. The next morning, he returned to the abbot. He bowed deeper this time. "I will begin again," he said, "but this time, I will begin with an empty cup." The abbot simply nodded and poured. In the West, we're taught to value accumulation, of knowledge, of opinions, of success. We believe wisdom is something gained, a kind of mental wealth, stacked neatly in rows. But in Zen, true seeing begins only when the shelves collapse, when we stop trying to name the wind and instead feel it on our skin. The story of the teacup is not just about humility, it's about presence, because most of us don't realize how full we are, not with wisdom, but with noise. Thoughts, fears, comparisons, labels for ourselves, judgments of others. Memories clinging like moss to the walls of the mind, and into that already crowded room, we try to invite truth. But truth is shy. It doesn't enter noise. It waits for silence. Once, a monk asked his teacher, "What is the essence of Zen?" The teacher picked up a broom and began sweeping, not as metaphor, but as truth. The monk blinked. "I meant the true essence." The teacher stopped, held up the broom, and said, "When your cup is empty enough to see this, then you'll know." The scholar stayed at the temple. He chopped wood, carried water, swept the garden path. He stopped trying to explain Zen and began living it. When thoughts rose, he bowed to them like old friends. When the wind blew, he listened. He stopped speaking about emptiness in essays and began to taste it in his bones. One afternoon, while washing bowls, another visitor arrived, a young academic from the capital. eager, brilliant, hungry for answers. He asked the abbot, "Master, what is Zen?" The abbot reached for the teapot. The scholar, now older and humbler, smiled gently and whispered under his breath, "Careful, your cup is already full." Commentary. We often think that wisdom means knowing more. But in Zen, wisdom is the art of unknowing, not ignorance, but freedom from the clutter of should and must, from the heavy robes of "I already know." To be empty is not to be void, it is to be receptive, to hold space for what arises, without grabbing it, without turning it into a theory. A teacup holds tea because it is empty. A mind holds peace because it is still. You cannot pour into what is already overflowing. You cannot meet truth if you are busy rehearsing your opinions. Zen is not an addition to your bookshelf. It is the moment you set the bookshelf on fire and warm your hands by the flames. There is a cup in all of us. Sometimes it's filled with pride, sometimes with fear, sometimes with knowledge we mistake for awakening. But when you're ready, when you truly long for clarity, you will tip that cup, let it spill, and then, and only then, will the tea of the present moment finally be poured. In one hand, he carries a book, the Prajnaparamita Sutra, the perfection of wisdom. In the other, he wields a sword, long, luminous, and aflame with clarity. He rides a lion, not to show power, but to symbolize the fearlessness of insight. This is Manjushri, the Bodhisattva of wisdom, where Avalokiteshvara brings compassion, where Samantabhadra brings vow and action. Manjushri brings the sharp, radiant truth. His name means gentle glory, but his wisdom is not soft. It does not comfort. It cuts. It slices through illusion with the precision of a blade honed on silence. The sword he carries is not for battle. It is for discernment. It separates appearance from reality, self from no self, thought from knowing. It reveals what we are too afraid to see and too free not to see. In the old sutras, it is said that Manjushri's wisdom is so sharp, he was enlightened before the Buddhas of the past. He is the eternal teenager of the Mahayana pantheon, ever young, ever clear, ever unburdened by delusion. Where others hesitate, Manjushri speaks. Where others follow rules, Manjushri asks why. Where others cling to views, Manjushri lets go, again and again and again. One day a monk asked him, "What is the nature of ultimate reality?" And Manjushri drew his sword in the air, then lowered it slowly, as if slicing through something invisible. That was his answer. Because words can't always hold wisdom. Sometimes it must be shown. In Zen temples, the figure of Manjushri is often placed behind the Roshi's seat, not as decoration, but as a reminder that true teaching must be rooted in clarity, that every word spoken should come from a place that has already cut through ego, opinion, attachment. The teacher, like Manjushri, must see clearly before they speak. There is a famous koan. A young monk full of doctrine said to the master, "I've memorized the Heart Sutra. I understand emptiness. There is no I, no ear, no mind, no path, no attainment." The master pointed to a bowl of rice and said, "Then eat, because understanding is not the point. Living is. This is what Manjushri teaches, wisdom that is not locked in scriptures, but embodied, applied, lived. The sword is not aggressive, it is necessary to wake us, to free us, to carve away the clinging and the confusion until only truth remains. Not an idea, but a mirror with no dust. There's a story told in the mountains. A disciple sat meditating, trying to silence his thoughts. He came to Manjushri in prayer and asked, "Please cut away my illusions." That night, in a dream, Manjushri appeared. He said nothing, only lifted his sword and placed it gently on the disciple's shoulder. Not to strike, but to remind him, the blade is not outside you. It is within. Commentary. Manjushri does not give you answers. He gives you the means to see for yourself. That is his wisdom, not dogma, but discernment. Not belief, but perception stripped of filter. The sword cuts two ways. It cuts through ignorance, but also through comfort. It forces us to ask, what have I built my life on? And what happens when that is no longer solid? Can I let go? Can I breathe? Even when the ground beneath me vanishes. Wisdom is not knowing more. It is needing less. It is silence that doesn't need applause. It is clarity that does not waver in the dark. It is the ability to sit in confusion and not flinch, to stand before illusion and not bow, to name what is and let go of what is not. The lion Manjushri rides is not a beast of war. It is the mind that has been tamed. The roar is no longer fear. It is the roar of reality unfiltered. The courage to face things as they are. There's a quiet danger in spiritual life. We want wisdom to feel good, to validate us, to comfort the parts of us that ache. But Manjushri reminds us, true wisdom will sometimes hurt. It will dismantle the story we've told ourselves. It will whisper, "You are not who you think you are." And if we listen, the story ends and life begins. In your own practice, the sword appears in many forms. The question you can't answer. The moment you realize you've been wrong. The teacher who looks you in the eye and says nothing because anything they say would only get in the way. That is the sword, cutting gently, so you can see clearly. You don't have to fear it. You have to wield it. In kindness, in honesty, in the decision to no longer live half asleep. When you chant, chant with the sword. When you bow, bow with the sword. When you love, love with the sword. Not to harm, but to see clearly what love is. Because love without wisdom is sentiment, and wisdom without love is cold. But together, they are Manjushri and Avalokiteshvara, and the path itself. The monsoon rains had passed, and the forest paths of Kosambi steamed with quiet life. Leaves dripped with silver beads. Frogs croaked low from the shadows. And above it all, the scent of wet bark and jasmine lingered like breath held too long. Under a canopy of tall sal trees, the Buddha sat surrounded by monks. They had walked for days to gather here. Some were old, most were young, their robes still crisp from devotion, their minds still sharp with questions. And today, the Blessed One had agreed to speak, not of morality, nor of meditation, but of something far subtler, of misunderstanding. He began, not with pronouncement, but with silence. Then, as the breeze shifted through the trees, he spoke. "There are those," he said, "who come to the Dharma, like a man searching for a serpent. A few monks glanced up. Serpents were no small matter in these woods, slender and swift, some deadly, some divine. This man, the Buddha continued, is told that a snake dwells near the roots of a great tree, so he goes into the forest to catch it. But he does not learn the proper way. He does not bring a forked stick. He does not wait for the right moment. He sees movement in the grass and lunges with bare hands. A few younger monks leaned forward. "What happens?" one whispered. The Buddha's gaze passed over them like moonlight on water. He seizes the snake by the tail. A ripple of discomfort passed through the listeners. "And the snake," he said, "twists and strikes." He paused. "And so it is with those who take hold of the Dharma wrongly, grasping at the tail, not understanding the nature of what they hold. And when it turns against them, they blame the teaching, never seeing that it was their own hand that erred." Silence fell again. It was not a parable to soothe, but to stir. For many in that circle had studied hard, memorized discourses, debated with pride. They recited verses in the marketplace, corrected others in the villages, and took satisfaction in knowing the words of the Buddha by heart. But the words were not the snake, and the Buddha knew it. A senior monk, Kakana, bowed his head and asked softly, "Blessed One, how does one hold the Dharma correctly?" The Buddha nodded. "Imagine," he said, "a man crossing a river. The current is swift, the far bank promises safety, and he finds no boat, no bridge. So he gathers branches, grass, and reeds. He binds them tightly. He makes a raft." The monks followed, some nodding. With effort, he crosses the water. And when he reaches the other shore, does he carry the raft on his back for the rest of the journey? A few smiled. A few looked unsure. "No," said the Buddha. "He leaves it behind, grateful, respectful, but he does not cling to it. He let that image hang in the warm, moist air." "So too is the Dharma," he said, "a raft to cross, not a burden to bear forever, not a weapon to strike others, not a badge to wear." A soft murmur of recognition passed through the monks. "But some," he continued, "treat the Dharma as the man who grabs the snake's tail. They take hold of words, of verses, of rules, not to cross the river, but to shout from the shore." He turned his palm upward. "They say, 'I know,' you do not. They say, 'This is the only way, yours is wrong.' They say, 'I have read, I have memorized, I have mastered.'" He paused. "But what have they understood?" A breeze stirred the forest floor. A leaf spiraled down like a question with no answer. "Understanding," he said, "is not repetition. Wisdom is not memorization, and truth is not a prize to be clutched." He looked at them all. "Do not seize the tail. Learn how the snake moves. Watch, be still, approach with care. Grasp rightly, not to own, but to understand." A young novice, no older than 15, raised his hand timidly. "But Blessed One," he said, "what if one clings to the raft out of reverence, out of gratitude?" The Buddha smiled gently. "Reverence is not the same as attachment," he said. "Gratitude flows like a river. Clinging dams the stream." He folded his hands in his lap. "To let go does not mean to forget. It means to honor the purpose and move on when it has been fulfilled. Several monks bowed. Some looked thoughtful, others uneasy, for the teaching had pierced the pride of many. A monk named Sati, known for his keen memory and rigid interpretations, frowned. "But Lord," he said, "should we not defend the Dharma from false views?" "Yes," said the Buddha without hesitation. "But first, defend it from misunderstanding within yourself. A man who argues from ego may win the debate and lose the path." He looked directly at Sati. "If you know a verse, but use it to shame another, you have caught the tail." He turned to the group once more. "If you teach to elevate yourself, you have caught the tail. If you study only to be praised, you have caught the tail. If you hold to rules to feel superior, you have caught the tail. And if you mistake knowledge for wisdom, you have caught the tail." The forest was utterly still now. Even the birds had quieted. "And when the snake turns and bites," the Buddha asked, "you will say the Dharma is false, that it failed you, that it was sharp, cruel, or useless, but the snake was never to blame." A few monks bowed their heads in shame. One of the older mendicants, seated on a mat of grass near the front, exhaled deeply. "I have clutched many tails in my time," he said, "but now I wish only to learn how to see clearly." The Buddha nodded. "That is the beginning of wisdom." That evening, as twilight turned the forest gold, the monks moved quietly through the camp. No chants, no debates, just footsteps and thought. Sati sat alone by the fire, his manuscript scrolls untouched. The novice who had asked about the raft sat beside him, quiet, respectful. Sati turned and whispered, "I used to think that knowing every word would make me wise." The boy looked at him. "And now?" Sati stared at the flames. "Now I wonder if I even know how to listen." In the stillness of the forest, the words of the Buddha echoed like a distant bell. "Do not grasp the tail, learn how the snake moves." And in the hearts of those who truly listened, the Dharma shed its scales of pride, of certainty, of rigid form, and began, at last, to breathe. The path of Zen unfolds like morning mist, soft and patient. In this next tale, we are invited to see, beyond appearance, into essence. Listen carefully to the next story. It happened in the monastery courtyard. A cat had wandered in from the fields, slim, white-pawed, with eyes like river stones. The novices argued over it. "Let it stay," said one group. "It brings joy. We feed it. It purrs. It lives among us." "No," said the other group. "It distracts us during zazen. It chases the sparrows. It has no place in a temple of silence." The voices rose. One claimed compassion. Another claimed discipline. Both believed they were right, but neither listened. And so they argued, loudly, endlessly, until the abbot, Master Nansen, appeared. He said nothing at first. He looked at the cat, then at the monks, then back at the cat. In one swift motion, he drew his blade from beneath his robe, held it high, and said, "If any of you can say a true word, this cat will be spared." Silence. No one spoke. The wind stirred. The cat blinked, and then the blade flashed. and the cat was gone. That is the story, told for centuries across temples and texts, debated, feared, questioned, but never forgotten. Later that evening, Master Nansen told the story to Yoshu, his senior student. Joshu did not argue. He did not recoil. He simply took off his sandals, placed them on his head, and walked out of the room. Nansen smiled. "If you had been there," he said, "the cat would have lived." What does it mean? Why such violence? Why the silence? Why would a master of compassion raise a blade? And why was Yoshu's nonsense, putting sandals on his head? The answer Nansen was waiting for. This is not a story about a cat. It is a story about attachment to views, about how quickly the mind clings to being right, how debates, even over seemingly noble things like kindness or rules, can become distractions. The monks thought they were arguing about the cat, but really, they were arguing from ego, from the illusion of my view versus yours. And Nansen saw it, in their noise, in their stubbornness, in their refusal to let go. He saw a sickness, and he responded not with teaching, not with reasoning, but with cutting. In Zen, cutting is not always physical. It is the sudden strike that breaks the mind free from duality. It is the moment the raft is kicked away, because it's become another attachment. It is the sharpness that leads to stillness, like a thunderclap that silences thought, like a stone thrown into still water, breaking the surface so deeply that the ripples stop altogether. The blade in this story is not just steel. It is a mirror, and what it reflects is uncomfortable, because the cat is not just a cat. It is that which we cling to while pretending to care. It is the debate that becomes a disguise for control. It is the idea of rightness that replaces actual presence. When Nansen raised the sword and said, "Say a true word," he wasn't asking for logic. He wasn't asking for poetry. He was asking for being, for someone to drop the debate, to step beyond language, to show life, not defend it. No one spoke. Not because they didn't know the answer, but because they were still stuck in thinking, still stuck in sides, still holding on. But Joshu, when he heard the story, he didn't try to argue it. He didn't try to defend the monks or condemn the master. He didn't even say a word. He simply placed his sandals, dusty, humble, ordinary, on his head, and walked out. Nonsense? Perhaps, or perhaps, a true word without speech. A gesture so absurd that it shattered meaning altogether. No logic, no stance, just presence breaking form, just action beyond thought, just emptiness wearing a shoe. Nansen smiled, because truth had finally moved. Not in words, not in argument, but in surrender, commentary. This koan disturbs many, because it seems violent. But Zen does not condone cruelty. It uses imagery not to glorify pain, but to jolt the mind awake. The cat is not the victim. The cat is everything we refuse to let go of while pretending we've let go. Your opinions, your need to win, your identification with spiritual knowledge. The cat is the argument that's gone on too long. The debate over kindness that's become unkind. The need to control the uncontrollable. And Nansen sees that no answer can reach those trapped in duality. Only a cut. Only a break. only a moment so sharp that the mind has no time to resist. Zen is not safe, not because it is cruel, but because it does not protect your illusions. It won't nod along to your spiritual ego. It won't politely entertain your ideas about Zen. It will instead hold up the blade, not to harm you, but to cut away what you're not, so that what remains is true. You cannot think your way out of illusion. Sometimes you have to shock yourself awake, to see the cat, to see the blade, to see the silence after both are gone, and then to walk out of the room with sandals on your head. Because in that moment, nothing makes sense. And finally, you begin to see, at the edge of a quiet village stood a tree unlike any other. It wasn't tall, wasn't radiant, didn't blossom with brilliant colors in spring, but still, people came. Not to pick fruit, not to seek shade, not to carve initials into its bark. They came to sit, to rest, to listen. Because it whispered, no one knew why. Some said it was the way the wind passed through its hollow trunk. Others believed it was the spirit of an old monk who had meditated there long ago. Children said the tree could speak. Old farmers said it could hear. But whatever the cause, the tree made a soft sound, like breath through a flute, or the hush of cloth moving gently through air. Just enough to quiet your mind. People began to visit it when their hearts were heavy. A woman grieving the loss of her son sat at its roots each morning. She never spoke, but the wind in the branches moved with such rhythm that her shoulders softened, and her tears fell without shame. A man who had lost his business sat by the trunk each evening after working odd jobs in town. He didn't pray, he didn't ask, he simply listened. And each night his breath grew steadier. Even monks came from temples near and far, not to teach, not to chant, but to sit in silence beside the tree. Sometimes for hours, sometimes for days. One traveler asked the village elder, "What does it say?" The elder smiled. "Nothing. That's the point." This is the story of presence without performance, of healing without explanation, of a silence that doesn't fix, but holds. There are trees in all of us, places in our heart that don't shine loudly, don't offer dazzling gifts, don't do anything, but simply are. And that is enough in a world that demands noise, results, progress, answers, opinions, profiles, performances. The whispering tree reminds us, silence is not emptiness. It is a kind of presence too deep for words. The Buddha once said, "Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace. And better still, perhaps, is no word at all, just presence, just sitting, just being." In the Zen tradition, some masters would respond to students' deepest questions by raising a finger, or drawing a circle in the air, or remaining completely silent, not because they had no answer, but because the answer could not be spoken. It had to be realized. The whispering tree was like that. It taught nothing, but revealed everything, if you stayed long enough. There's a story of a student who asked his master, "What is enlightenment?" The master pointed to the mountain. The student frowned. "I don't understand." The master said, "That's because you're still trying to. Some truths don't want to be understood. They want to be felt, held in stillness, carried in the breath. Commentary. We are conditioned to speak, to respond, to fill silences, to offer advice, to explain our pain, to solve others' suffering. But sometimes what's needed is none of that. Sometimes what's needed is what the whispering tree offered. Presence without pressure, silence without absence, listening without fixing. The mind wants sound. The ego wants performance. But the heart wants stillness. It wants to be seen without being judged, heard without being analyzed, held without being improved. You don't have to have the right words. You don't have to be wise. You don't have to fix yourself or anyone else. Sometimes just being there with your whole attention is the most sacred act. The whispering tree didn't change anyone. It didn't speak truths, didn't prescribe practices, didn't offer instructions. But people left it feeling lighter, not because they got something, but because they let something go. Let go of the need to perform, to be impressive, to be certain, to be healed already. Let yourself be the tree. Let yourself be the wind. Let yourself be the stillness between the branches. Silence is not the absence of something. It is the presence of everything. So, when you don't know what to say, don't. When someone is hurting and you want to help, sit with them. When your own heart feels messy, wordless, unsure, be still. Let the whispering begin inside, and trust that silence is a teacher too. In a quiet village by the sea, there lived an old potter. His hands were calloused from decades at the wheel. His workshop was small, bare walls, a low fire, and shelves filled with cups and bowls in every stage of becoming. People came from faraway towns to buy his pottery, not because it was flawless, but because it wasn't. Each piece had a tiny flaw, an uneven lip, a swirl in the glaze, a hairline crack sealed with gold. They were beautiful, but never perfect. One day, a student came to learn. She had steady hands, a precise eye, and a longing for perfection. The old potter gave her clay and pointed to the wheel. She worked hard, every day. Her bowls were smooth, her cups symmetrical, but the old man never praised them. She grew frustrated. "What am I doing wrong?" she asked. The potter picked up one of her perfect cups and held it to the light, then gently set it down. "Nothing," he said. "It's beautiful, but it does not speak." She blinked. "Speak?" He nodded. True beauty, whispers of time, of change, of the hands that shaped it, of the cracks that taught it to hold. Then he handed her a chipped teacup, lined with a golden seam where the crack had been mended. "Look again," he said, and she did. The crack shimmered like morning light across water. It didn't ruin the cup. It revealed it. It gave it history. It made it whole in a different way. This is the heart of the teaching, wabi-sabi, the beauty of imperfection, the quiet wisdom of things that do not last, the grace of the incomplete. In Japanese tradition, broken pottery is not discarded. It is repaired with kintsugi, a lacquer mixed with gold or silver, not to hide the break, but to honor it, to say, this too is part of the story. Buddhism speaks of impermanence, anicca, as one of the three marks of existence. Everything that arises passes. Everything that is born changes. Everything we love will one day break. And that truth is not meant to depress us. It is meant to wake us up. To love something fragile is not foolish. It is courageous. To drink from a cracked teacup, knowing it may not last another year, is to say, "This moment matters because it will not come again." The student learned slowly. She stopped trying to make perfect pieces. She let the clay wobble, let the glaze drip, let the firing crack a rim now and then. And when it did, she filled it with gold. One afternoon, she brought the potter a cup she had broken by accident. She expected him to scold her, but he smiled. "Ah," he said, "now it begins." And together they repaired it, not to erase the break, but to bless it. Commentary: the cracked teacup is not about pottery. It is about you, about your heartbreaks, your failures, your aging skin, your tired hands, the things you thought made you less beautiful. Maybe the very things that make you most real, most whole, most you. We live in a culture obsessed with flawlessness, airbrushed images, filtered faces, words rehearsed until they lose their soul. But Buddhism invites us into a different gaze, a gaze that sees truth in the wrinkle, wisdom in the scar, grace in the stumble. You do not need to be flawless to be worthy. You do not need to hide your breaks. You only need to honor them. To say, "Yes, I cracked, but I learned how to hold more." There is an old saying, "The wound is where the light enters you." But also, the gold follows the fracture. Your pain is not shameful. It is precious because what you do with it, how you mend, how you carry yourself forward, that is your art. The next time something breaks, a plate, a plan, a piece of your confidence, pause, take a breath, gather what remains, and ask, how can I make this whole again? Not by hiding the crack, but by letting it shine. You are the cup, and you are also the gold. In the hush of understanding, Zen offers us another glimpse of what it means to recognize worth not by weight or shine, but by presence. Here starts the next story. The path was dry that day. Dust lifted from the earth like breath from grief. It clung to her ankles, soft and persistent. But Kisa Gotami did not notice. Her feet moved forward, bare and steady. Her arms, once empty with loss, now carried the truth. It had been some years since she had fallen at the feet of the Buddha, begging for medicine to save her dead child. Then, he had sent her through the city, asking for a mustard seed from a house untouched by death. At every door she knocked, and at every door sorrow had already sat before her. Now she understood no house was free from loss. But this story begins not with her arrival, nor her wisdom, but with the silence before it. Kisa Gotami was once radiant with joy. She had married into wealth, borne a healthy son, and laughed easily beneath flowering trees. Her life was not lavish, but it was full. Her husband was kind. Her in-laws praised her for her quiet strength and good nature. And her child was the axis of her world. His laugh echoed through the garden, a sound so bright it seemed to ripple the petals of the lotus pond. But when sickness came, it moved like fire in dry grass. First, a fever, then the cough, then the silence. Her husband wept, her in-laws prayed, neighbors brought herbs, ointments and whispered remedies passed down through generations. But nothing stilled the trembling of the boy's limbs, nothing cooled his burning skin. And then, one still morning, as dew clung to the leaves and the world turned quietly onward, he stopped breathing. Something in Kisa Gotami's mind refused the truth. It broke, not like glass, but like a door slammed shut against a storm. She did not bury him. She could not. Instead, she wrapped his small body in linen and cradled him close, as she always had. She walked barefoot through the streets, her face blank with disbelief, her voice hollow with pleading. "He is only sleeping," she whispered to merchants. "There must be something, some medicine, some root. Please help me wake him." People pitied her. Some turned away, ashamed. Others wept at the sight but dared not speak. A few offered dried herbs or quiet prayers, not to cure, but to comfort. But none could give her what she asked for. Then one old man, gentle and weathered like the bark of the Bodhi tree, placed a hand on her shoulder and said, "Go to the Buddha. He sees clearly. Perhaps he will know what to do." So she did. Through dust and heat, she walked to the monastery, her arms still wrapped around the stillness of her child. Her eyes, dry now, saw only hope. When she reached him, the Buddha met her gaze with unwavering calm. He did not flinch at the bundle in her arms. He did not speak quickly or softly or with sorrow. He simply said, "Bring me a mustard seed from a home where death has not visited. Then I will help." Kisa Gotami bowed deeply, grateful beyond words, and ran. House after house, door after door. She knocked. She asked. She waited. At the first door, a woman with kind eyes shook her head. "My brother died last winter," she said. "I'm sorry." At the next, a man held his son in his arms and said, "If only. We lost his mother at childbirth." At another, a young girl barely older than her own son opened the door, tears still fresh on her cheeks. "Grandfather passed last night," she whispered. Each story struck her not like a blow, but like a chisel, slowly carving away at her illusion. With every encounter, her burden changed. The weight of the child in her arms remained the same, but the grief within her no longer stood alone. It became something shared. A river of sorrow running through many homes, not just hers. And in that shared space, she found the first breath of peace. She returned. She did not knock this time. She did not beg. She simply walked to the Buddha and placed the body of her son before him. Then quietly she said, "I see now. There is no house without sorrow." The Buddha nodded, and without ceremony, without demand, he welcomed her into the Sangha. She shaved her head, took on the robes, learned to breathe again, learned to walk not to escape grief, but to carry it with grace. The seasons passed like silk through her fingers. She became a teacher, not of words, but of presence. Her voice was never the loudest, nor her gestures the grandest. But when she sat beside those in pain, their breathing slowed, their trembling eased. She was the stillness they had forgotten could exist. One morning, as the sun rose pale over the bamboo grove, a young woman arrived at the monastery. Her face was drawn with confusion. Her hands trembled with exhaustion. Her eyes were red, but not yet emptied of tears. She had lost her father. Suddenly, cruelly. Though she had performed all the rites, burned all the offerings, sat in silence beside her mother, something inside her chest would not still. "I do not know what to do with this ache," she said. She asked for Kisa Gotami. The nun sat beside her beneath a neem tree. Birds moved through the leaves above them, and the distant sound of sweeping could be heard from the monastery steps. Kisa did not rush. She listened, let silence breathe between them. Then she placed a small, smooth pebble in the girl's palm. "Carry this," she said, "for 3 days, but each day speak to one person about someone they have lost. Ask for their story, then return." The girl did as told, and on the 3rd morning she returned, eyes swollen, chest raw, but breath moving freely. She knelt at Kisa's feet and wept, but the tears came with space, with rhythm, with healing. "I thought I was alone," she said. Kisa Gotami nodded. "Grief is a shadow," she said. "It grows darker when we sit beneath it alone. But when we share it, it moves, it thins, it teaches." The girl asked, her voice barely above a whisper, "What did it teach you?" Kisa looked to the far hills, where the morning light softened the edges of the earth. "That the heart does not break from love," she said, "but from the illusion that love can be possessed. My child was not mine. He was a gift. So were the mornings we shared, the soft sound of his feet, the questions he asked at twilight. His death was not punishment. It was part of the changing tide. We do not own the ocean, but we can learn to swim." The girl placed her hand over her heart. "Will this ache ever leave?" "No," Kisa said gently, "but it will grow roots, and from those roots something will bloom. You will never be the same, but you may become more." The girl bowed low, forehead touching earth, and so another seed was planted, not of mustard, but of compassion. Kisa Gotami came to be known not for her loss, but for her light, for the way she listened without rushing, spoke without preaching, held without clutching. She walked through villages not to convert, but to sit, to be, to remind those in pain that no house stands outside sorrow, and no heart must bear it alone. Thus, the lesson of the mustard seed lived on, not in the search, but in the returning, not in the seed itself, but in the soil of shared humanity it revealed. She had heard hundreds of stories, pain layered on pain, grief knotted with shame, rage disguised as silence. Dr. Anjali Mehta was a seasoned therapist, 47 years old, calm voice, warm eyes, a room filled with soft lamps, quiet bookshelves, and a single blue armchair that caught the afternoon light just so. She had learned over time that her work was not to fix people, but to witness them, to hold space, to wait, to not flinch when the truth arrived. That afternoon, her 2 p.m. client sat stiffly, teenage boy, 17, sleeves pulled over his hands, a stare that hovered somewhere behind her shoulder. He didn't speak for the first 8 minutes. She didn't force it. She just sat, breathing gently, grounded, present. When he finally did speak, it was one sentence. Everyone talks like they know what I'm feeling. They don't. She didn't nod too quickly, didn't say, I understand. Instead, she let silence do what words often can't. There's a saying in Zen, she offered softly, that the teacher is like a mirror. They don't speak for you. They just show you where the dust has gathered. The boy blinked, looked at her, and, for the first time in weeks, said something more. There is a deep wisdom in the pause, the moment between a question and an answer, the breath between emotion and reaction, the silence that honors pain without trying to patch it. Anjali once had a mentor who said, "You don't need the right words, you need the right presence." She had taken that to heart. Her patients didn't always thank her, didn't always improve quickly, but many came back. Because there aren't many places in the world where someone will sit with your brokenness without trying to sweep it away. She remembered an older woman once, widowed after 42 years. The woman cried for 45 minutes straight. Anjali didn't interrupt, didn't analyze, just handed her a tissue and stayed. At the end of the session, the woman whispered, "You're the only person who didn't tell me to be strong." Anjali said nothing, but later she wept, not from sadness, but from the honor of witnessing someone's unguarded truth. Therapists are trained to listen, but Anjali had learned to listen beneath the words, the tightening of a jaw, the hesitation before a name, the breath that catches after, "I'm fine." Sometimes her job wasn't to provide answers. It was to be the room where the storm could pass. She had a small bell on her desk, never rang it, just kept it there to remind herself, return to this moment, over and over. One evening, after a long day, she wrote in her journal, "People come in with tangled lives. I don't untangle them, I just hold the threads until they can begin to see the pattern." The boy in the blue hoodie came back the next week, and the next. He still didn't say much, but he sat and listened, and didn't flinch when she said his name. It was a start. And sometimes that is enough. He was the oldest monk in the monastery. No one quite remembered when he had arrived. He had been there before the abbot, before the bell tower was built, before the bamboo grove behind the kitchen had taken root. They called him Elder Wen. His robe was patched at the sleeves, his back curved like a bowed reed, and his eyes were always smiling, like he had seen something long ago and never forgotten it. He didn't teach, not formally, but every morning he lit the incense before dawn. Every afternoon he watered the moss around the garden stones, and in the evening he swept the meditation hall in silence, the broom moving in time with his breath. You could walk past him and miss him entirely, unless you were paying attention. Then you would feel it, that quiet radiance, like sitting near a warm lamp on a winter night. One spring, Elder Wen stopped coming to morning service. He didn't light the incense, didn't sweep, didn't bow. He stayed in his small corner room beside the main hall, lying on his straw mat with hands folded gently over his chest. He was dying. The news spread quickly. Monks whispered in the corridors. Some feared, some mourned. Some tried to distract themselves with chores. But one by one, they made their way to his room. To say goodbye, to ask for wisdom, to seek some final teaching. But Elder Wen said almost nothing. He just smiled. that same soft smile, unmoved by sorrow, unafraid of what came next. One young monk sat at his side and finally asked, "Master, are you not afraid?" Elder Wen opened his eyes. "Afraid of what?" he whispered. "Of leaving." The old monk chuckled softly, a sound like wind through dry leaves. "Leave where?" He looked around his humble room. "There is nowhere to go." Another monk asked, "What is your final instruction?" Elder Wen blinked slowly, then raised one trembling hand and pointed to the teacup beside his bed. It was half full. The tea had long gone cold, but the sunlight touched it just so, glinting off the rim. He smiled again, then closed his eyes, and that evening he passed. As gently as a flame curling into smoke. No struggle, no fanfare, just a long exhale and stillness. The monks held a memorial. They chanted sutras. They carried his body wrapped in white cloth to the forest. But what they remembered most was not the ceremony. It was the smile. This is the story of death without fear. The final bow of a life lived in awareness. Commentary. In the West, we prepare for death with wills, hospitals, and quiet dread. We pretend it is far away, or we avoid it entirely. But in Zen, death is not the enemy. It is the mirror that shows you whether you were truly alive. Elder Wen was not afraid because he had already practiced dying. Every time he let go of a grudge, every time he stepped aside for someone younger, every time he bowed in silence, releasing his self-importance. The teacup was his final teaching, so ordinary, so overlooked, but it held the whole Dharma. A cup is useful because it is empty. It can hold, receive, release. But if you cling to the cup itself, you miss the tea. If you fear the cup breaking, you never enjoy what it holds. Elder Wen was ready to leave because he had drunk deeply of life. He had tasted the tea, and he didn't cling to the cup. There's a Zen saying, "Let death come like a welcome guest." That doesn't mean we rush toward it. It means we don't turn our back on it. We live with it, like a quiet friend who reminds us not to waste time. Elder Wen's room is empty now, but the moss he watered still thrives. The broom still leans against the wall. The teacup still rests on the low table, cleaned and dry, and his smile lives in the memory of every monk who sat beside him and realized, stillness is not defeat, stillness is trust. You do not need to fear the end. You only need to live in such a way that when it comes, you can greet it with a breath and a smile. As the lantern of awareness glows a little brighter, we come to a tale about seeing with more than the eyes. Let the stillness guide you now, and listen carefully to the next story.